Hello, my friends. Welcome to another video, and this is one that I've been putting off for quite a while, honestly. I truly didn't think I was even going to do it, but a couple of you were asking for it, and that kind of pushed me to get started, and then once I got started, I realized just how much of a project it is, which is really the whole reason I didn't want to do it to begin with, because today we are going to be comparing The Death Cure, the book, to the movie. If you haven't seen, we did talk about The Maze Runner and The Scorch Trials, the two books and movies that came before this one, so if you're not caught up, go watch those and then come back here. But if you watch those, you would know how I feel about the Death Cure movie and also just how intimidated I am by this video because I truly did not know how I was going to go about it. The book is so wildly different from the movie. Without repeating myself too much, if you are interested in the story at all, please go read the book, watch the movie before seeing this, seeing how I talk about it, how I feel about it. Truly, I think that the Maze Runner series, the books, are just so well written and they actually have something to say, and I think they're crafted so well. And the movies are what they are, you know? And of course, books and movies are both completely different mediums. They're both gonna tell stories in different ways. There are different audiences that they're trying to appeal to. So this is not necessarily to say that one did a poor job or not. We're strictly saying, does the movie do a poor job of translating what the book was trying to do? I'm not trying to hate on something you love if you happen to love the movie or something, because I'll just be upfront about it. I don't like it in the slightest. I think it's not even half as good as this book and the story that it's telling. And the problem with making this video, the reason I didn't want to do it is usually when I'm doing this, I will read the book, watch the movie, and then I can kind of split the video up into different settings or different events where it's like, here is everything that happened in the book up until this point. And then here's everything that happened in the movie up until that same point. So they're kind of aligned throughout the story, even if certain details are changing. I can't do that for this one because the story is so different. Even from the opening scene of this movie, it is telling a completely different story, so there's no way I'd be able to compare the two scene by scene or character by character even. So the only way I can think to do this is to give you a recap of the entire book and then go to the start of the story in the movie and tell the whole movie. And as we go through the movie, we'll be able to talk about all the things that it did or did not hit from the book. Normally I like to time it so that the reveals that happen in the book kind of line up with when you see it in the movie. I don't want to get too ahead of myself or make it confusing as I'm telling the story, but there's truly no other way to do this because they're like two completely different stories. The only thing that they share is the names of the characters, honestly. We're gonna start with the book, we're gonna go from the beginning up until the end, the true end of this story. Unless, of course, you read the Kill Order and the Fever Code, but we're not gonna get into all of that. We're gonna go through this book, we're gonna talk about the events that take place, how I feel about it, and then we'll circle back around and talk about the movie. Let's get into it. Normally I would hold it up, but because we're just talking through the entire book, I'm gonna set it right here. So the start of The Death Cure follows pretty much immediately after the end of the Scorch Trials, which, if you don't remember, the Scorch Trials ended with everybody getting gathered up into a burg. They say, hey, actually, you guys aren't gonna die by flare. They say that everything is done for real this time, things are gonna be better, and of course, the Gladers don't know what to believe or not because that's what they were told immediately before being thrown into the Scorch, so, you know, just because Wicked is saying that they're safe, it doesn't mean anything. Everybody showers and goes to sleep, and when Thomas wakes up, he's in a completely white room. He realizes he's dreaming, and he hears the voice of Brenda in his head saying that things are about to get bad, which is odd because up until this point, she hasn't been able to talk in his head, so what's that all about? He wakes up in a room that actually is just all white. He can't contact anyone, he doesn't know what's going on, but he decides he's done panicking, he's done having these big emotional reactions, he's just gonna let it happen. And then of course at the end of the book, you get the message from Ava Page that comes at the end of each of them where she is saying that when the time is right, they're gonna remove the memory swipe from these people and they're gonna reveal who is or is not immune to the flare. Up until this point, all throughout the Scorch Trials, they thought they all were going to be infected. They all were going to die by the flare. That's why they ran through the Scorch Trials, is because they needed the cure that's at the end. But the ending of this book reveals that actually some people are immune. So anyways, at this point in The Death Cure, Thomas has been in the room for roughly 3 weeks. There's no way for him to know time for sure, but he's doing his best to keep track. He's sitting there isolated, there's nothing he can do, no one he can talk to. He's just stuck in his own head thinking about how he has the flare, how he is sick, how things are gonna get worse, how he can kind of feel himself decaying. He feels like something is wrong in him and he's just sort of waiting for the infection to take hold. When he was first put into this room, the Gladers were told that he is succumbing quickly to the flare and that's why he had to be isolated. And now he's starting to worry, is that true? Is that really what's happening to him? But of course he also has complicated feelings towards Teresa, who did betray him quite a bit in the last book. So he's sitting there, he's mad at Teresa, but he also isn't sure if there's some truth to what she said. And her final words before they cut communication were still, "Wicked is good." So even after everything, she's still believing that. And it takes almost a month, but he is eventually let out of this room. Ratman, or Jansen, who is the same one that introduced the Gladers to the Scorch Trials, comes into Thomas's room, and he immediately starts telling him what's been going on. He tells Thomas that there's a purpose to all of this, that they're finally getting to an answer. But Thomas is mad, of course, he's been through so much, and he's questioning what is the point of it all. He asks, "Do I even have the flare?" And Ratman confirms it. He says, "Yes, you do," as if speaking to a child, as if he feels bad for Thomas for that being the truth of his situation. He almost seems like he has compassion in this moment with the way he's speaking. He admits that Wicked has done awful things, but it's for this greater purpose. And he says that it's time that Thomas knows everything. They kind of go back and forth about whether or not the end justifies the means. Is it okay that these kids suffer, that they go through the trials, that they have all of these terrible things happen to them, if it means there's a cure for everybody else? But then before they leave the room, Jansen reveals that actually Thomas is part of a group that is immune to the flare, and that's part of why he was being studied. And that the people that are immune in society are generally hated because they can't be affected by this thing that so many people are haunted by. Which, of course, Thomas takes this information and immediately guesses that all of his friends are immune as well, and that's what all of this was about. But Ratman slows him down and says, "Hey, actually, only some of you are immune. There are some that weren't because we needed a control group. We need to see what's gonna happen to people that aren't immune versus who are. They're watching the brain patterns of all of these people, so they need a group that can be infected as well as a bunch of people who aren't to see what's different." But he doesn't specify who is or is not immune. That comes later. And Ratman just continues to explain a little bit about the trials, about the kill zone, about how they're mapping the brain patterns to try and figure out what a possible cure is based on how the immune people's brains are reacting to different things. It's a bunch of technical stuff that is cool, and I think it's really awesome how they actually kind of thought about the world and the technology and the goals of Wicked while writing this part of the book, because otherwise it just seems like it's all for nothing. You know, so when you have a character that is actually invested in the work that they're doing and they do actually have a goal in mind and there are things that, you know, are measurable, you can see that regardless of if Wicked is doing the right thing or not, they at least feel like they are. They're at least dedicating the appropriate time to something like this if it's something that they believe in. And then he sends Thomas to the showers. He says, "Hey, go take a little time to yourself, get cleaned up, get, you know, out of this mindset that you've been in the past couple of weeks where you've been locked in this room by yourself. And then we're gonna take you to go see your friends." And when they get together, Ratman says that they all had gone through different trials. This was their phase 3, but it doesn't really go into detail about what happened to anybody else. So they all went through their own troubles, but nobody ever talks about it really. He reunites with his friends, but when Teresa comes up and tries to hold his hand to try and have some sort of connection, because of course at the end of the book, in the last book, she had been betraying him all this time, and then she's still trying to get in his head saying that Wicked is good. She wants him to trust her, but then she's just not very trustworthy, right? Like, she's constantly going back and forth, and she had broken his trust in a way that it just really can't be repaired at that point. How many times she went back and forth in the Scorch, there's just no way for him to believe in her anymore. So she goes to hold his hand and he pulls away. He doesn't want any relationship with her anymore. And in that moment he decides that from now on he's only going to trust Mino and Newt. Ratman announces that they will all be getting their memory swipe removed. They'll all be able to remember everything, but it is also optional. And the Gladers have mixed opinions. Some of them obviously want to remember their childhoods. They want to remember maybe the good life that they had before getting thrown into all of this, but Thomas and some of the other Gladers think that this option is too easy, that maybe they don't want to remember. They want to live this more complicated life where something was taken away, but now they feel so strongly about the things that they feel strongly about. They don't want to get their memories back and then maybe revert to their old mindsets or something like that. The main trio, Thomas, Newt, and Mino, are scared. They don't trust Wicked's intentions, and they don't really know if they want to face the past, if they want to see their former selves, or maybe remember what the world is like. And, you know, I mean, that would be an incredibly difficult decision to make, right? To remember maybe the good times before everything fell apart, but then to know that it's already so far gone. Especially if you're somebody like Thomas, who was a direct part of making the maze. to then have to go back and face that knowing that the maze trials are already over for all of these people. You can't really do anything to fix what you've done. And for that reason, they kind of decide that they don't even want to know the past. They don't even want to think about what had happened before, because now they are who they are, and they just want to live with the existence that they know, and that's that. And it's around this time that Jansen also reveals who is or is not immune, and we find out that Newt is one of the people who is not immune. He can get infected. And he tries to put on a brave face about it. He makes some comment about how life wasn't that great anyways, and it just sucks because he's such a good character. And I think it's so smart to make him be the one that can be infected, because it hurts so bad. You're rooting for him so hard. This guy's never done anything bad ever, so it just sucks that it has to be him. But also, earlier Ratman had said that the control group that they have, the people that aren't immune, are the glue in the situation. They're the thing that holds the experiment together, and that just happens to be the name that was on Newt's neck from the start of the previous book. So that title has been around for a while, even before they really knew what it meant. Yes, he's holding the friends together, he's holding the Gladers together, but even bigger, he's holding the entire experiment together. Teresa encourages them to get the swipe removed and to remember their past selves, but Minnow and Newt say that they will do the opposite of whatever Teresa wants, and Thomas is with them, so they all agree to not get their memory back. And they agree to play nice for now, they'll leave things alone, they'll do as they're asked, but they're gonna find some way to fight back when they have a moment. Everybody is led to different rooms for the procedures, and Thomas keeps telling his friends, wait, we're not gonna take our moment yet, there's gonna be some point where we can break out. But there are guards, and then there's Jansen saying don't try anything, and eventually the time just runs out, and then there's nothing else they can do because now they're surrounded by people that work at Wicked. Minnow and Newt are a little bit upset about that. They're like, hey, why didn't you let us make our move? Now we can't do anything. But also, while all of this is happening, they enter one of the operation rooms, and Brenda is a doctor there, working with Wicked, and despite Jansen's objections, she runs up to Thomas, and it's like a cutie little reunion, but she gets up in his ear and says to only trust her and Chancellor Paige. And Thomas is very confused, because at this point, Brenda is meant to be infected, she's meant to be sick, so why should he trust her? And also, who is Chancellor Paige? In the movie, she's somebody that you see throughout all three of them, I think, but in the book, she's not a character that you ever really see. She's somebody that you only hear from in the ending emails. So to then have her name brought up in the actual story was such a shock, because I was so expecting her to exist already, you know? The fact that Thomas didn't even know who Paige is, when in the movie she is the leader of everything and she's so involved in everything in the movie, and for her to not even exist as a character yet in the book was kind of jarring. And it's funny because in the movie she's painted as such a villain. She is so evil for at least the first two movies, where she's really devoted to Wicked and doing everything. Maybe she's not as much of a villain as Jansen, but she's certainly on the wrong side of things for a while, because she's just believing in this thing that is so against the main characters. And of course I have my frustrations with whether or not I think Wicked is justified in the book versus the movie, but at the end of the day, she has such a personality for the company, and then you get to the book where she just doesn't exist in this world yet. She has not been mentioned in the actual story. It's just really interesting to see how the movie chose to interpret that character. Thomas and the guys get taken to a dorm of sorts, and when they wake up, Jansen says, hey, actually, I know you said you didn't want your memories back, but what if we gave you your memories back? And Jansen explains that they can't have come this far just to come this far. They have to follow through, they have to finish what they started, they have to get these memories into these guys so that they can see what's going on and so that they can continue on with what they're doing. And he hopes that by giving these people the memories, they're gonna be on board again, because they're gonna remember what it's all for. And Newt reacts to the situation with uncharacteristic aggression. You can kind of see the sickness starting to peek through, because at the end of the day, he's been infected for weeks. At this point, he was infected before they started the Scorch trials, if Wicked was telling the truth. And even if they were lying, he for sure caught it while they're in the city. So at this point, it's still been a couple weeks. The flare is slowly starting to get to him, and he's starting to act a bit more irrationally. The guys pretend to go along with Jansen, and they talk about how they hope they can get Newt a cure, but when they go out into the room to get the operation, they fight back. Unfortunately, it is this trio of the three main Gladers versus, I believe, 5 armed Wicked guards, and they're taken down within a minute. They didn't stand a chance here, and Jansen is pretty upset at them. He's saying, hey, you are supposed to be the brightest people that we have in our study. Why would you do something so stupid as fighting back in this situation when you obviously can't win? The guys are all separated and taken to their procedures, and Jansen says, hey, put Thomas in Brenda's room. Maybe the sight of her will calm him down. But the thing is, even that level of trust between Jansen and Brenda lets us know that Brenda's been working for Wicked for quite a while. If he feels confident enough that Brenda is loyal to them versus to Thomas, you know? Bad move on his part, though, because Brenda is all in on Team Thomas. She admits that, yes, they were acting in the Scorch, that she and Jorge are actually immune to the flare, they've been working with Wicked, but her feelings are still very much the same. And as they prepare for this procedure that's going to remove the memory swipe, Brenda chooses to sedate one of the people in the room doing the operation rather than Thomas, and that gives them a moment to break out. And you can start to see a shift in how these characters interact, because I mean, in the last book, it very much felt like Brenda was forcing herself to be around Thomas, that he wasn't really ready for the dynamic that she wanted. She was very pushy, I guess, and in this one, it's a lot more. He's starting to like Brenda a lot more because she has shown that she hates Wicked. They're both fighting for the same thing. She's obviously very strong, very confident, and she believes in him. Versus Teresa, who has betrayed him time and time again. Unfortunately, you do end up rooting for them, even though it just felt off in the last book. But they come up with this plan where Jorge knows how to fly bergs, the big thing that took them in the last book. He knows how to fly, so if they can just get to the berg, then he can get them out of there. And as they're running away, the power in the building goes out. It seems like something is definitely wrong because for sure there'd be guards all over them, right? They're escaping this giant facility where they are, like, the most valuable people. They gather up Newt and Mino on the way to the berg and to Jorge, but they're confused because there's just a lack of people in the building. There's just nobody around. They get to a weapons room, which is pretty much fully stocked, except for one area which looked like it was just recently taken from, and the guys have to theorize about who could have possibly taken these weapons and for what. It is so quiet in the halls, is it possible that maybe Cranks had broken in and stolen weapons, and then they're attacking the Wicked people and that's why there's no security around? Is there some other threat that the Wicked guards are more occupied with? Like, it doesn't make any sense why they're running around and there's nothing happening. Mino proposes one of these reasons, and Newt gets really mad at him and yells, and again, uncharacteristic rage from this guy. He apologizes, he steps out, he takes a second to himself, he comes back in, and Mino immediately says something that gets him all upset again. They end up having an actual fight, Newt punches him in the face, and Thomas is pretty worried at this point because his team is kind of falling apart. If Newt is succumbing to the flare and Mino is just a little bit too childish and a little bit too impulsive, it's just not a very reliable group at this point. And it sucks because these are the people that he has relied on for the past 2 books through all of the trials. So for them to now both be at a weird breaking point, it's just not a great feeling. And Newt briefly steps away again to calm himself down, and he goes to a different part of the building for a second, but doesn't really explain why. They let him go. They let him do his thing, he calms down, and then they get back together and everything is okay. Brenda explains to Thomas that Newt's condition is going a lot more rapidly than it would for the average person because of the trials, because they're there for how smart they are, right? Like, there's so much brain activity and so many reasons for them to be thinking so much. Like, not only are these people together because they're some of the brightest, but also they're being put in these situations where things are going to be constantly going 1,000 times faster than average life. Newt comes back and gives Thomas a letter, but says not to read it until the time is right. He says, if you do read it, I will never forgive you. They continue running through the facility, but again, no people around. No Cranks, no friends, no security, there's just nothing. They do eventually come across a room where a bunch of guards are tied up, which is odd, and again makes them wonder if maybe Cranks had broken in and somehow taken control of the guards like that. Brenda wants to question them to try and get information, but the Gladers vote that they just keep on moving. They don't want to see whatever caused this. Which, looking back at that, it's really interesting because there ends up being some miscommunication about what occurs here, and it would be really cool to see what the guards said in this moment, because I don't think the timeline of it was actually ever cleared up, so I'm wondering what they would have said occurred. Regardless, they get to the hangar, they're getting to the Berg to meet up with Jorge, and it's really cool because every time they go into a new setting, anytime they're going through a door or anything like that, they all get together and they talk about, here's the formation of how we're going to approach this door, here's who's going to shoot in this direction and who's going to go which way, so that they're all, like, watching every exit and they're all gonna shoot at whoever's coming. I wish I had said that in a cooler way, but what I'm trying to say is it's really cool that they coordinate their attacks and they actually have a plan going into every difficult situation, because in the movie it really just feels like action for the sake of action. Whereas in this, they seem so intentional about everything that they're doing because they know that they are outnumbered and they are not as skilled and they're not as protected as the people that they're up against. So what they do have is really good communication and understanding of each other that actually plays a part. But anyways, they get in, they see the Berg, and they see Jorge on the ground, which is not a good sign. He wakes up and he lets them know that the other group of Gladers, Teresa and everybody else that had gotten their memories back, came in, bonked him on the head, took a Berg, and left. which of course the Gladers had a pretty hard time coming to terms with this, because not only does it mean that there is no Crank invasion that they need to be worried about right now, but it also means that Teresa and the other Gladers, including some of their friends like Frypan, just up and left and didn't even look for them, because at this point, if that group of Gladers is able to do something like tying up all the guards, like making sure that there's nobody wandering the halls, surely they would have had the time to find these 4 that are left behind. But the fact is they chose to leave. They had the people, they had the numbers, and they still just left. So it's just another way that Thomas feels betrayed by all of this. The plan still stands, though, and Jorge sets up the Berg to get ready to fly, but as they're getting over to it, security comes into the hangar. They all try to run for the Berg to get in and fly away before anything happens, but Brenda gets hit with a launcher, which is like the electric shooting gun. She falls, and they're obviously not able to run away while she's in that state. They can't grab her because they'll get hit too. So they have to make a new plan to kind of get around this little conflict. They manage to avoid getting caught until she's a little bit better, and then they drag her up onto the ship, but right before they're able to close the door and take off, Thomas gets hit, and he takes a tumble down the ramp and back onto the floor. He hears sounds of the Berg taking off, and for a second he thinks that he's being abandoned again. This man has such bad trust issues, and for good reason. He is going through it, but they do come back for him, of course. Roughly 10 hours after the flight, they took some time to sleep and recover, but now Brenda is discussing what life is like out in the real world. Because the thing is, when Teresa and the Gladers escaped, you have to think, where are they possibly going, right? You've been living here for so long, but of course these people have their memories. They know a little bit more about the outside world now. And Jorge uses both his knowledge of the world and also a tracker in their Berg to find out that the group is going to Denver, which is one of the few remaining functional cities right now. And yes, Teresa's Berg is being tracked, but Jorge is really good with his technology and knows how to protect theirs, so this group is safe for now. Brenda gives a little bit more backstory as she's talking about what life is like. She says she joined Wicked for survival, that at the time people would do anything to get to just another day. So yes, while she was working with them, she doesn't necessarily agree with what they're doing, she just wanted to be alive. And she explains that, I mean, really, the Gladers don't know what it's like out there, especially because this group doesn't have their memories back. So they can't exactly judge her for making that decision because they don't know how difficult it was. And Brenda tries to kind of be devil's advocate here. She tries to say that maybe Teresa had a good reason for going to Denver, that maybe she's on the same side because she also wanted to escape Wicked, and surely that's a good thing, right? They both had the same end goal of getting away from this facility, even though Teresa's been saying that she's pro-Wicked this whole time. Maybe she got her memories back and realized that things aren't how she wants them to be. And they talk about why Denver might be a good place to escape, because not only is it fairly isolated and kind of a normal functioning city-ish, there's also a former Wicked doctor there who knows how to take out the implant that they all have that is a tracker and also allows Wicked to control them and allows Thomas and Teresa and Eris to talk in their heads. So it might make sense for Teresa and the group to get away to Denver just as a nice place to go where things are relatively normal and they can try to hide away, but it also makes sense for this group to go there because they gotta get the trackers out. You can't run away from Wicked when you got a chip in you that's telling them exactly where you are, so that is their highest priority right now. They come up with this plan to go to Denver to get the chips removed, but Denver, because it's one of the few functioning cities, has to have really good security to make sure that you don't get a bunch of infected people coming in and ruining what they have set up. So unfortunately, they decide that Newt is going to have to stay in the Berg because obviously, as somebody who's infected, he's not going to make it through the checks. The guys try to say that they could maybe sneak him in, but he doesn't want to feel responsible for getting anybody else sick. He doesn't want to infect the city, and he also says that he has nothing to live for, which just, it sucks how much he's saying that. Like, how over this life he is to where he's so ready to accept that this is the way things are. I love this character so much, and that's the one thing that, I mean, even book or movie, he's just so good. He just doesn't deserve any of this. Jorge gives them all fake IDs, and they enter the city. They do make it through security, no problem, and that is the first time that these Gladers, at least in their current memory, are experiencing just a normal city. Normal people walking around without looking like they're about to die, which of course is something that so many of us now know as just the way things are. So it's so interesting to think about how these characters, at the age that they are, and having experienced this in the past but not knowing it, it's so different to anything that they've encountered before, you know? It says that Brenda and Jorge look kind of embarrassed at how Thomas is looking at the city, but he's so in awe because he's never seen anything like this. And even with all the technology that's in the city, it's just so cool. It's such a cool image. And then really quickly, as they're looking at the city, a man rushes up. He says that he knows they're escapees from the Berg, which they saw flying in as a giant ship that just flew right next to the city. But he passes them a note that's signed by the Right Arm, which, if you don't remember, is the group that's kind of anti-Wicked. They're trying to make better use of the resources that Wicked has. And this note is signed by Gally, but the last time we saw Gally, we thought he died. The last time we saw Gally was right after he had been controlled by Wicked to kill Chuck, at which point Thomas beat him up so bad that they thought he died. And then this makes me mad. I think this is one of the most upsetting things in this book, and it is the fact that Brenda, who was working for Wicked, does have her memories and was a part of controlling the trials, right? She clarified that Chuck had been forced to move in front of Thomas, that the Psychs wanted good patterns not only from Thomas or Gally or whoever, but also from Chuck. They used his final moments as just another test. I talked about it in one of the previous videos where I was kind of thinking about what it would mean for whether or not Chuck had jumped in front on his own terms, or if he had been forced, or if Gally had done that on his own terms, if he had been forced, or, you know, at that point there's really no way to know who was doing what, whether they meant to do it or not. We know that Gally was forced to throw this weapon to Thomas or to Chuck by Wicked. He was being controlled. And we know that Chuck had jumped in front of Thomas, but at the time it seemed like a friend willing to sacrifice himself to save Thomas, which is kind of a common theme in this story. People just love to sacrifice themselves for this guy. But it just feels so important seeing it the first time and thinking about this kid who's so young, who barely experienced anything. He's such a sweetie, and he thought it was worth it to jump in front of this blade for Thomas. Versus now, learning that even that wasn't his choice, and thinking about how he must have felt in that moment where he didn't want to jump in front, but maybe he was happy he did it because he saved Thomas, or maybe he was upset that Wicked made him do that, made him sacrifice himself for somebody, or, like, don't drop that information on me, I don't even want to know. I would love to live in this perfectly happy little world where we think that Chuck wanted to do something great and jumped in front of Thomas in order to save his friend. I don't want to know that Wicked made him do that, because it just hurts to think about. And Brenda explains that after all of that had happened, Gally's mind couldn't handle it. He couldn't process what he had done or what he had been forced to do. So he went insane, and Wicked didn't want anything to do with him, so they sent him out into the world. And because of that, Brenda doesn't believe that this note is from Gally. She says his mind was so gone, there's no way this could still be him. But, of course, I mean, curiosity's gonna win here. They have to know, is this the real Gally or not, because they either think he's dead or so out of it that there's no way he'd be doing all of this. Thomas wants to see Gally to just verify what's going on and to kind of see a familiar face and to get a better understanding of what actually went down. Brenda wants Hans, the doctor that can take the chips out, but Mino is worried that Gally might be a trap, so there are lots of different opinions about what they should or should not be doing right now. But at the end of the day, of course, Thomas gets to decide what they do, and he says that he's done waiting to anticipate Wicked's next move. He's done trying to guess what they're gonna do to get one step ahead to try and beat them. He's just gonna do what feels right. And in this moment, what feels right is finding out whether or not this is actually Gally. As they're going through the city, he is talking a little bit more about the technology around them. He's talking about these holographic screens and the hovering vehicles and all these big skyscrapers. And again, I think it's such a beautiful mix of futuristic technology with things that we're familiar with. Throughout all of these books, there are just certain things that are introduced that are just not possible with what we currently have, like the flat trans, where you can literally just teleport somewhere. It's so foreign to our current existence, but it's paired with things that are so right now, you know? Versus the movie, where there's literally no, like, new technology in the slightest. It's all just stuff that exists right now, so it doesn't feel otherworldly like it's supposed to. I think a big part of the horror of the book is that there are so many things that seem futuristic, but then at the end of the day, the troubles that are going on are very much real and present day. So you can sort of imagine it in this fun futuristic world, but at the end of the day, these troubles are a lot closer than they seem. And also, as they're walking through the city, Thomas sees a poster for Chancellor Paige. He's again wondering, who is this person? Why should I trust her? But he's not alone with Brenda, so he doesn't want to ask. It seemed like that was something kind of secret that she wanted to bring up, so he doesn't mention it here in front of his friends. They're taken to Gally's apartment in this, like, deserted alley building, and he doesn't look so good. He's got scars all over his face, his nose looks even more broken than it did before. His room is really dark, there's no furniture. It doesn't look like a great setup, but the guy's got some tricks up his sleeve. He's been busy. He reveals that Wicked gave him back his memories without asking permission, so he does know who Jorge and Brenda are already, and they talk about what happened with Chuck, where the guys apologize to each other. Thomas and Gally both apologize for everything that went down, because at the end of the day, they're both adult enough to recognize that Wicked is the thing behind it and not necessarily that they should be blaming each other for what took place. And Gally explains that he did like Chuck. He wouldn't have intentionally killed this kid, and if he had known that that's what Wicked was planning to do, he would have tried to fight back. But he thought it was gonna go for Thomas, so he just let it happen. He hated Thomas enough to want to kill him because of what he knew about Thomas's involvement in the creation of the maze. Despite all of that, they have to work together now, and they're kind of chill with each other. Like, of course they had this conflict before, but at the end of the day, they're okay with each other now. They've kind of moved past it. They've come to terms with the current situation. And it's really nice to see that they're not just holding on to this old stuff forever because they recognize that it really wasn't their fault. You learn a little bit more about the right arm and what they're trying to do with how they're gonna take Wicked's resources to use it for something better, because they really don't think that all these trials to find a possible cure are the best way to use things. And also, during this conversation, Gally reveals that he wasn't actually insane like Wicked thought he was just told that if he acts a certain way, he'll be set free. So he pretended up until he could escape. And you also find out that the reason Gally knew that the Gladers were coming here was because he had gotten an anonymous message, and at the time he assumed that Thomas or one of them had sent it, but they don't know anything about a message. So somebody sent a message to Gally to say, hey, your friends from the Glade are coming to the city, and nobody knows who it was. And it's never resolved. And there are just little secret moments like this that take place throughout the story where it's never directly stated who is responsible for these things, but you can sort of piece it together by the end, and I think that's really fun. Regardless, they're talking about what they can do, how they're gonna go forward, what is possible to try and take down Wicked, which is obviously this massive thing, and they are just some kids. And they identify two problems that are holding them back. For one thing, the flare might be going a little wild in the city. It's possible that it's taking things over a lot more than the government is willing to admit, especially because it's probably also infecting the government. And they're hiding the sickness by using the bliss, which slows down your brain, but also it can only hold things off for so long, and also if you're on that, you're probably not going to be running a government very well, so things are just going downhill, right? And the second issue is that immunes are just disappearing for no reason, and it's kind of assumed that Wicked is taking them for new trials. The thought is that because these trials didn't work, because the people got away or they weren't good enough test subjects or whatever it might be, Wicked is now buying new immune people to just start all over. And that sucks, especially after how far these Gladers have come to try and get away from all of it, to just know that it's gonna happen again and again and again, and they're gonna keep searching for this cure even though it might not ever happen. Because again, in the movie, there is kind of this idea of a cure where they have something that kind of works, but in the book, they don't have anything. Wicked has done all this work, they've put these kids through so much, and they don't have anything to show for it. So the fact that they're willing to start completely over is just a bit, It's just a bit, is what it is. And around this time, they also find out that Wicked knows that they went to Denver and has put a bounty out for Hans, the doctor that is meant to take out their chips, because obviously that's probably the first person they're gonna go to. So they have to reassess their plan, and they decide, of course, going to this doctor is the highest priority because they don't want anything to happen to him, but more importantly, they don't want anything to happen to him before they can get what they need out of him, which is kind of, it is what it is, right? They don't want him to run away and then they don't get the procedure that they need. But also, hopefully, some part of them doesn't want something bad to happen to him, just period. So their plan is they're gonna go there, they're gonna get the procedure done, and then they're gonna meet back up with Gally and the right arm to take down Wicked. It takes a whole day, but they do end up finding Hans, and he prepares for the procedure. But as they're getting Thomas ready, he loses control of his body. He is fully unable to control his own body, he can't move, he can't speak, and he vaguely remembers the idea of a failsafe that's built into the chips where if somebody tries to take it out, the body is gonna fight back. And wouldn't that be a nice thing to have remembered before this moment? There's this whole battle where Thomas is yelling at them, but of course it's not actually him doing the talking. He's being forced to say these things. He's being forced to lash out at his friends, but he just keeps yelling that they can't do this, he won't let them do this. It ends up taking 4 people, Minho, Brenda, Jorge, and Hans, to hold him down before they're finally able to take control and sedate him. And it's really interesting to read about his mindset during this time because he's talking about how he's never been so conflicted where his body is doing one thing but his mind wants another, where he's actively yelling and hitting the people that are trying to sedate him, but at the same time he hopes that they can do it so that he can actually get this procedure done. And it's really cool to see inside the mind of somebody who's being controlled by Wicked or by a Wicked device, where they're so aware of what's going on but so unable to stop it. And then also to think about the fact that Gally said that he could have stopped it if he wanted to, if he knew that it was going to be directed at Chuck, right? Where Thomas is trying his very hardest to fight the power that Wicked has over his body, but he's not able to do anything, really. And then you have to think, does Gally just have a lot of confidence that he could do it, or is there a part of him that actually could take control of his body despite the fact that Wicked is making him do things? While Thomas is asleep during this procedure, he dreams of the Purge, which is something that he didn't want to think about even before he lost his memories. He just never wanted to think about it. He blocked this memory out completely, but it shows us a little bit more of his and Teresa's involvement in Wicked, where you learn that all the people that had originally set out to make the maze and to do the trials and to find a cure got infected. And in order to protect the work that they were doing, Teresa and Thomas purged the office. They got rid of everybody and they hired a whole new, fresh cast of people to do the trials. So throughout all of this, Thomas would also be carrying the guilt of knowing that he killed the entire original group of people that had been working on this, and they chose everybody that would follow that. What a big thing to put on a couple kids. If it all went wrong. They just have to make that decision and they have to live with it. I mean, I'm sure the earlier staff are people that they had grown up with, right? These are people that were taking care of them from a young age while they try to figure this all out. So for these kids to then have to make that decision in order to protect the work that they're doing, that's how much they believed in it. That's how much they felt like they needed to continue. And throughout this book, you start to see more and more of this idea that maybe Thomas was onto something when he was doing it the first time. Maybe there was a reason that he believed in it so much. He's so anti-Wicked now, but for him to do something like that where he believed in it so much before. But also, Teresa was a lot more the person that did it before. Thomas was already, shutting himself off to that event as it was happening. He didn't want anything to do with it because it's just, it hurts, right? You don't want to think about that. Thomas wakes up post-procedure. He and Mino are free from the shackles of Wicked, and Hans and his wife decide to leave for safety. On their way to Gally and the right arm and whatever big plan they have, they stop at a coffee shop, and Brenda tries to disclose a little bit more about the past and maybe about her relationship to Paige or her past in general, but Thomas doesn't want to hear it. He straight up says, I'm done thinking about the past. I don't want to know the past. I don't want to know anything that goes on. I only want to know the future. I only want to move forward. And it's like, yeah, that's great, buddy, but she's not talking about what you did. She's trying to give you important information about maybe her relationships with other people. Especially if you're wondering about Paige, this is potentially current and future information that you need to know. If you don't even know who this person is and you're being told to trust her, don't you want to know a little bit more about why? And while they're sitting and talking, they see this guy who Brenda says is probably on the Bliss, which means there's an infected man in the city that's supposed to be highly regulated. The guy is spotted by guards, and there's this tension that fills the cafe where everybody ends up leaving, but Thomas wants to stay and see what happens. And one of the guards, or the people that contaminate the sickness, I don't really know what their role is. They're just called red shirt guy. But one of those guys is in the building and they ask Thomas why he's there, and they don't believe that he's from Wicked, and they don't let him leave, but instead they force him to watch what takes place with the infected man. A couple other of these guards or whatever they are show up, and they end up shooting this guy with a gel that goes over his entire body and solidifies, so he's fully enclosed in this thing. I don't know what happens to him after that. But if it is an airborne disease, then I guess this would be an effective way of containing it. His friends try to get him out, but the guard notices and is like, hey, you can't be a part of this, so they all run, and they leave Thomas for a while. And then this guard guy ends up taking Thomas by gunpoint down the street and leads him to a car where he says, hey, get in. And he says that Thomas is going to make him a lot of money, so I guess the idea is probably that he's going to try and sell Thomas back to Wicked because they're gathering the immunes, or some sort of system like that. As they're walking down the street, they pass a sign that describes the flare, which says that it's a man-made infectious disease. It accidentally was released during the sun flare catastrophe. There's no treatment at this time, and it can be spread through the air. But then, as Thomas is getting into this car of this guy for whatever's going to happen next, the guy gets shot down and dies. And Thomas hears Jansen's voice, of all people, but he's not there physically. He's just in this machine that shot the guy and also is speaking. He says that the reason he's not there in person is because Denver's infection rate is so high right now, but that Thomas, they've decided, is the final candidate. That he had the best results out of everybody in the trials, and they need him to come back so they can finish things because he's the most likely person to have a cure for them, I guess. And he also lets Thomas know that Newt is probably in more trouble than they realize, because usually the flare can take weeks or even months to fully develop in a person, depending on, you know, what's going on, if they're using the bliss, stuff like that, depending on how much brain activity is going on in there. And at this point, Newt has had the flare for a little while, so he's starting to show signs, but even the aggression that we saw means that things are taking a turn for the worse. And Jansen sort of leans into that to tell Thomas why he needs to come back to make a cure because they have to save Newt. He tries to make it this personal thing where Thomas should come back to save Newt, his friend. And Thomas says he'll think about it. The Jansen machine flies away. Minho, Brenda, and Jorge find Thomas. They're like, hey, what's happening? Why is there a dead man next to you? And they decide to stay at a hotel for the night before going back to check on Newt, who is across the city, right? He's outside the city in a burg, but on the other side of things. So they're gonna just rest for the night and then they'll get started. And as they're walking around the city, they realize that things are, again, kind of quiet, kind of weird. There's not a lot of people, there's not a lot of activity, but they do get the feeling that they're being followed. And then as they're crossing the city, they see some unpleasant things. They're walking along, they see a man hunched over in the dark, or like in the bushes. It's kind of hard to see what he's doing, but when he stands up, there's blood all over his face and all over his hands, and they try and, you know, see it in a nicer way, say maybe he was just eating an animal. Best case scenario, it was only an animal. It's a lot more likely that it was not an animal. But it's unsettling, right? Because this is one of the major cities that are left in the world, and it's being advertised as this highly regulated city where you have to go through these checks, you have to make sure you're not infected, that you're not going to spread anything in the city, and now you just see a bunch of sick people walking around, just moving freely through the city. So clearly the regulation is just not working right. They make it out to the burg, but Newt is gone. And they find a note that was left by him that says he was taken to live with the other cranks. Again, he's kind of accepted that this is just the way that things are now. He's just saying his final goodbyes, he's saying what happened, he wants to be left alone to fade away with this other group, right? And this is one of those times where we see Thomas questioning his decision to leave Wicked, where he's thinking, is it bad that I left instead of trying to find a cure? And he wonders if he owes it to Newt to find a cure, because here is his friend who's going through exactly what they were trying to solve. And is it possible that they could have fixed it before it became this even bigger issue? Despite everything that's been going on, despite the urgency of the situation and needing to find Gally in the right arm and trying to get back at Wicked before they get caught or found or whatever else, Minho now steps up and makes the decision, and he says, regardless of what Thomas or anybody else thinks, because of course Thomas is always making the decisions, he says, regardless of all of that, I don't care what you think, we're gonna find my friend. We're gonna go find Newt in this place and we're gonna get him out of there, because they don't like the idea of Newt sitting in this crank zone dying slowly. Brenda explains that every major city has this thing called a crank palace, which is where you go when you're sick to die, but you're not so sick that you can just be sent out into the wild. You're still mostly okay, but it's only gonna get worse, so they get sent to this place, and you're sent there until you reach the Gone. Tornado pilots mention anyone? They don't have ammunition, they don't really have a plan, but they're gonna go find and save their friend. They fly over to where this crank palace is, and when they land in a patch of trees, Thomas is thinking about just nature and the world, and he's thinking about what the world would be like if people just stopped existing, and thinking how fast would nature bounce back after something like that. And it's a thought he has a couple of times throughout this book, but I think it's really interesting to not only call out the bad ways that people might react to a situation like this, but also to think about maybe how beneficial it would be to the world if everybody just phased out. Obviously, there is so much around the idea that humans want to survive and like trying to extend humanity for as long as possible, but how would the world react if humans were gone? How quickly would things go back to just kind of being better? Whatever, that's a conversation for another day. But they get to this crank palace, they see the guards, and usually there's better security, but again, like, nobody cares about anything anymore. The guards ask for money in exchange for finding Newt, and it's chill. And as they're walking around, the guards describe the horror, because at one point this used to be kind of a good idea, but because the people in the crank palace know that they're dying, there's really no punishments that they could face that would be worse than what they're currently living. So there's no authority. There's no structure. There's nothing that can be done. You just throw these people in there and let them do their thing. So you end up with this really bad situation where a bunch of people are dying and slowly losing their minds, and there's no way to regulate what's happening in there. And more people are getting infected, and it's going a little bit too fast to keep up with, so now you're throwing way too many people into this unregulated zone. Add on top of that the houses have glass windows, and you have a bunch of people with weapons and no way to stop them. And it sucks to think about, because they talk about how you can't have healthy people and infected people going around in the same place. So you have to take the sick people somewhere, but you can't drop them off somewhere where people who are so far gone are gonna be, because then you're just like throwing them to the wolves. But these people are also not sick enough to just outright kill, because if you're just killing everybody the second they get sick, I mean, that's also awful to think about, right? So you end up with this really bad situation where all of these people who are just kind of sick, who are just starting to lose it, are now being thrown into this place with people who are on the brink of being gone. And it's just chaos, and it sucks to think about. And if you think about it, like, realistically, like, what would our world do in a situation like this? How would you react to this? I don't think there are very many people that would say you can just kill whoever gets the slightest bit sick. I mean, I say if, as if we didn't just live through something quite similar. It gets to a point where it's kind of every man for himself. Do you do what is good for your own survival and through that the survival of other people, or do you just kind of do what you feel like and hope it all works out? Again, conversation for another day, but I love the conversations that could be brought up because of this book. It really hits on quite a lot of big topics that should be thought about more, right? Which is what a good dystopian book should do. Again, walking through the city, seeing the people that are infected and seeing what they're going through, Thomas is wondering if he made the right decision by stepping away from Wicked and by stepping away from potentially finding a cure for all of these people that are struggling. The guards elaborate a little bit more on the fact that immune people are disappearing, and they say part of why everything is going downhill is because over half of the workers here that are immune disappeared within the past couple of months. So all around the city, all around the Crank Palace, there are more and more people getting sick and being shipped in. There's nowhere to put them, no way to control them, and the people that would be typically working there, since they can't get sick, are disappearing for no reason and no explanation. The guards go into the palace to try and find Newt and say, hey, your friends are here, but 20 minutes later they come back and say that Newt has told them to get lost. The Gladers say, no thank you, we would like to go see our friend please, and they force the guards to take them in. And the deeper into the Crank Palace they go, the worse the conditions are. There's just more and more people that are losing it, and they're a lot more closed in. And they find Newt all the way on the inside in a bowling alley, and when they approach him, he's not happy to see them. He told them to get lost. This part is really frustrating because he is communicating as clearly as he can, which is impressive considering the circumstances, and they still don't listen. Newt is yelling at them. He turns around and they see he's holding a launcher gun, which he took from a guard that was making him mad. So you can see the aggression, you can see the rage that's just so unlike him, and Thomas realizes that his friend is never going to be the same again, which obviously, the guy has the flare. Like, what do you mean he's not going to be the same? You know he's infected. And sure, if that means you feel guilt about not creating a cure, then go do that, but don't act like it's a surprise that your friend is sick. Whatever. They go back and forth. Newt is saying, please leave, I don't want you here, I'm gonna stay here and live with these other people who are sick just like me. And Thomas and Minot keep saying, no, we're gonna get you out of here, we're gonna take you back, be our friend. And Newt is saying, no, but for real, I don't want you guys to see me losing it. I don't want you to have to be there for that, so if you could just leave before that happens, that'd be great. Which sucks that even at the end, he's being considerate, he's trying to do what's best for them. He doesn't want them to see him like that. He wants to be remembered as being just their friend and not whatever's gonna happen after. Mito says if he's gonna go crazy, then so be it, but let him go crazy around them and not around the Cranks, and Newt fights back and says, well, he is a Crank now. They can't deny that. They can't try and erase that as part of who he is now. He says how hard it is for him to stay calm and to say a nice goodbye, but he wants them to just go and to remember him like this. And he says that he does have a plan with some of the other people there to escape for Denver in the following days. The other Cranks start to gather around and they say, hey, Newt told you to leave, so you should leave now. And a little fight breaks out, which ends up with Newt pointing the launcher just around, and he says he doesn't care who he's gonna shoot, he's just gonna start shooting. Eventually, Thomas decides that Newt is going in and out of sanity and decides that it's best for them to leave, which I think is just so silly. Like, just respect the guy. If there's no cure, there's no way to fix it, he's telling you very directly what he wants. Why are you fighting so hard? But one other thing to remember during this time is Newt is specifically mad at Thomas, but we don't know why. There's some reason where he looks at Thomas and he's like, and you, how dare you be here? And we don't know what that reason is, and Thomas doesn't know what that reason is. But for some reason, Newt has something against him specifically. Eventually, they get the message and they turn to leave. And then the guards that escorted them are gone, and they're seen running from a different direction because they're being chased by very angry Cranks. The guys do eventually run and escape, and when they get back to the safety of their burg, they mourn the loss of Newt, and Mino says that he starts to understand Wicked a little bit more and what they're doing, which is the same type of doubt that's been creeping into Thomas's head. So this is something that they're all kind of on the same page about, where as they see how bad the flare is, as they become more informed about the state of the world, they realize why Wicked might be so dedicated to finding a cure. Of course, throughout these trials, they're just being put through terrible things, and they don't even know what for. They don't know how bad the flare is. They don't know how it's affecting the world. And then as they're put through the Scorch trials, they can start to see kind of a glimpse of that. But even then, the conditions are so extreme that it's hard to even take that in as a reality. So to then go to a city and you see so many normal people and you see how even they're being affected, you start to really come to terms with how bad things are. And yeah, you might start to feel guilty if you have a way of fixing it and you're choosing not to. At the end of the day, they are kind of choosing their own survival over everybody else. They don't want to be put through more trials. They don't want to put their lives on the line for a potential cure, but the more they see how bad it is, the more they kind of feel that responsibility. The group decides to take a couple days off to rest and to cope with everything that's been going on, and then they're gonna go find Gally. But before anything else happens, Thomas remembers that Newt had left him a note, and he says, well, if there's any time to read it, surely it's now, right? So he opens up this note from Newt, and it just says to kill him. Assuming he wrote this back in the Wicked facility, when he was only just starting to feel the effects of the flare, he already knew he didn't want to live like that. He didn't want to become one of these monsters, and he asked Thomas to do this thing for him, which is why he's mad that he's still alive. And he looks at Thomas and he says, how could you do this? How could you be here? But in reality, Thomas didn't even know that that was a request. Although even if he had known, I guarantee he wouldn't have done it because this man has never done anything for anybody. That's a little bit dramatic. But truly, even if Thomas had read that note beforehand, he probably wouldn't have done it. But it just sucks to see such a sweet character who cares so much about the people around him, and that's the one request he had. And it just completely went past. The moment passed, and it didn't happen. He trusted Thomas with this, and it just... A couple of days go by, they're rested, they're ready for whatever's coming next. They go to Gally's apartment. But as they're getting out of the burg to go see him, they're surrounded by 3 people, led 2 cars where there's 3 more guards, so now they're outnumbered. And they get taken to some mystery location, which is full of other people. And they learn from these other people that things have gone downhill pretty quickly, that the government declared a shutdown, and then things just fell apart. They find Eris in this room with a couple other people from Group B, and they learn that Frypan and a lot of the other Gladers were taken and were likely sold back to Wicked, which sucks. And Teresa is also here and requests to talk privately to Thomas, which, thinks he shouldn't. But of course he goes and he hears her out. They go back and forth where Teresa is trying to convince Thomas that she's on the right side of things, and Thomas goes back and says that she's just evil and bad. She says that everything she's done is to save him and that she's tried to do what she thinks is best. And at the end of the day, things weren't going so well before, but she wants to make up for all the bad that she's done, which includes making the maze, making people go through all this. Because she realized that things will never end. The cycle will continue. Wicked is just going to keep finding new kids and keep running these trials. She is no longer pro-Wicked like she has been. She's now trying to find a way to get it to end. And as they're having this conversation, Thomas is sad to think about the fact that there was a time when they were friends and where they had worked together so seamlessly, where they got along so well, but he doesn't remember it, and she does. So this whole time while they're talking, she's able to think back to a time where they were coworkers, where they were maybe more than coworkers, and he just doesn't see her that way at all, and he can't remember a time where he did. Of course, during the actual maze, they had their moments, but nothing like what they had before, right? There's just always been this lack of trust, because at the end of the day, he doesn't really know her anymore. But she tries to convince him that she's on the right side of things now, and that she wants to fix all the bad that's been going on. And then, while they're all being held here, some guards come in to offer food and water, but Mino decides he's gonna cause some trouble. He ends up getting into a fight, and they're able to ask one of the guards, who are you? What do you want with us? What does Wicked want from us? Because they assume they're being kidnapped for Wicked. But the guard reveals that actually they're not part of Wicked at all, and they're working with the right arm, but that's all they know, and if you want more information, you're gonna have to go to the boss. They warn that it would be dangerous to all go to the boss because you'd have to go out into the world, which is overrun with cranks, so only 2 people are gonna go out. And Thomas immediately says he and Brenda will go because they worked so well in the Scorch and they're just a good team, right? Which of course offends Mino, who thought that he'd be a great teammate with Thomas, but Thomas knows he's a little bit too reactive. He's a little bit too quick to anger, and the last thing they need is somebody reacting too soon in a situation where you maybe need to think about things. His temper is a liability, and so he is left behind, but Thomas tries to make him feel better by saying, hey, you need to stay here, you need to watch over things and make sure that everybody here is okay. And that introduces us to a new character whose name is Lawrence, and you're gonna want to remember that for later. Can't say it actually matters, but it's an interesting thing, isn't it? Because this is a nothing burger of a character. He has no reason to come back around, but he does. Lawrence is one of the guards, and he takes Thomas and Brenda, who all have weapons-ish, Thomas has a pistol, Brenda has a launcher, and they get to decide between walking, which will take a bit longer, but they'll be a bit more discreet as they're moving, or taking a van, which is going to be noticed by the cranks, but at least they'll get where they're going faster. And they choose the van because they'd rather not be out in the open walking around with all of these dangerous people around. But as they head out on this journey, a crank jumps on top of the car, which is not a great sign. And as they're driving, you can really see how bad things have gotten, which is impressive, honestly, because things were so normal just a couple days ago. But the whole city has been overrun by cranks at this point. The sick outnumber the healthy. It's bad. They end up going down this alleyway that's really dark, and when they turn on the headlights, there are 30 or more cranks in front of them. And rather than running up to attack, or rather than just kind of waiting, they all part, and they invite the van to go on through. And if that doesn't seem like it's a trap, I don't know what to tell you. But the driver didn't see anything wrong with it, and they go right through the middle. The tires of the van get messed up, and they end up just getting demolished by these cranks. They're on all sides, they're bashing at the windows, they're on top of the car, they're gonna break in, but Lawrence is able to drive away before any actual damage is done to the people inside, at least. The car is pretty messed up at this point. They pull into where the right arm boss is staying, and he says that there are probably 20 or so guards with guns pointed right at them until he can prove that they're all on the same side. So he goes out, he clarifies things, and then Brenda and Thomas get out of the van as well. At which point, Thomas and Brenda are taken to Vince, who is the boss, and also Gally, who is just chill with him. And Gally vouches for them and says that they can be trusted. Vince explains that the whole kidnapping operation that they became involved in was actually part of this bigger plan to mimic Wicked's behavior to then sell this group of immunes back into Wicked as a way to infiltrate. The right arm asks what Thomas and Brenda have to offer, how they can support their efforts, and Thomas says, well, Wicked wants me, so there's that. Vince says, is that all? And Thomas says, yeah. And it seems like the right arm has good intentions with what they're doing, where a lot of them aren't immune, and they're likely not going to live to see the results, but they still want to take down Wicked just because they don't believe in what's going on. They don't believe a cure can be found like this, and they think the resources can be used better elsewhere. So even if they won't get to live to see this better future, they want to set it up for other generations. And they explain kind of the bits and pieces of a strategy that they have right now where they're going to try and take down Wicked. So they're going to send this group in as immunes that are being sold, but really it's a way for the right arm to get in. And they also have a way to limit what weapons Wicked can use, because it all relies on the same type of technology, and they happen to have this woman that just works in that field and found a way to block the signals. So she can fully shut off all of their big fancy weapons, which puts them on a much more level playing field, because now they can kind of just fight normal style, rather than Wicked having all of this big fancy stuff that can easily overpower a group of people who really, I mean, they're not, like, trained, they're not prepared for something like this, they're going in with passion and not much else. And sometimes that's all you need. They say that they have 3 Bergs and around 80 people that are willing to fight, so they're going to get the immunes inside, plant the device that's going to jam up the weapons. That takes a couple hours for it to do whatever it's doing, and then they're going to blow a hole in the side of Wicked, get inside, and take everybody down. And the plan is to reallocate the resources, but they also say they'll blow up the whole facility if that's what it takes. Which, this plan sounds great to Thomas, because he knows his group's knowledge of the facility could be helpful here. And Vince rants about Wicked and what they're doing, which this is a thought that does come out in the movie as well, and I think it's, probably the most important thought here. Kind of the whole thing that Wicked's doing and the back and forth that you might feel in a situation like this, where they spent so long trying to prevent the spread of things. They spent so long putting all of their time, all of their resources into a possible cure and creating this false hope, and if they keep waiting, they're gonna run out of people to save. That's something we see in the book and in the movie, where so much work is being put into finding something that could maybe fix things. Meanwhile, the people that are still alive are going downhill. What good is a cure if nobody lives to see it, right? Obviously, finding a cure to something like this would be optimal, but if it's so far out of reach, it's just this idea, you think you might be able to come up with one someday, surely some effort should be put into saving the people that can live, right? And the original plan was for the people that are immune to plant the device when they get inside, but if Thomas is volunteering himself, he'll be much better at doing that job. So the new plan is Thomas will be dropped off a couple miles from the Wicked facility, he'll walk up as though he's giving himself in, as though he's ready to be the final candidate and do whatever Jansen's asking, and then once he gets into the facility, he'll be able to drop off this device, which is going to start their break-in. The next morning comes around, they're getting ready to make the drive that will bring Thomas to the Burg that's going to take him to the Wicked facility. He's in the car with Lawrence, and he observes that the city looks a lot more safe during the day when the sun's out. But then as they're driving, they come across a circle of cars, and they're just driving around. But Lawrence says that a detour to get around that would just take way too long, so he's gonna go straight through it. And of course, the cars that are driving aimlessly go and hit him, and then their car crashes. This guy, Lawrence is just full of ideas, isn't he? But sure is a good thing that the car crashed right here, because when Thomas looks outside, he sees Newt with this group of cranks. And before Lawrence can drive the van away, he says, hey, stop, I gotta go talk to my friend, I gotta go make sure he's okay. And at this point, you have to remember that Newt has been slowly losing himself, and that he's already mad at Thomas for not killing him before. So Thomas gets out of the car, and Newt is still angry. He's upset. He flat out says, why didn't you listen to the note? This is the one thing I asked of you and you couldn't do it. And he says how he can feel himself slowly getting lost to the infection. He can feel it taking over his mind, which just sucks so bad. And still, Thomas is arguing and saying, hey, we can bring you with, we can figure this out. Newt doesn't want that. He is so, far gone. Not necessarily gone, but Newt just doesn't want that. He wants to be left alone, or better, he wants to not be there at all. He doesn't want to experience this anymore. Why would you drag it out even more when he's already expressed this to you multiple times? What else can he do in this situation? And it sucks because it's the same thing that happened even in the Scorch Trials, where the guy, at the start of the movie, I don't remember, I think it was Winston, but he's unwell, he's very infected, and nobody can do the killing blow. So they just leave him with a gun and walk away. And it's like, even in a moment like that, do a mercy killing, because these people are only gonna get worse. They're only gonna feel more terrible before this thing takes them over and then they become something that they hate. Obviously, that's a hard decision, but when you have multiple friends asking you to do that, you say, hey, please don't let this happen, don't let me become one of them. At some point, that has to mean something, right? Newt is mad, and Thomas can't tell how much of what he's saying is real versus how much of it is just the Flare making him say stuff or whatever. But Newt is saying how Thomas always has to be the hero, how he couldn't do this one thing. And he clarifies here why he has the limp, which I think I said in the other video. I wasn't sure what the reason was, or if there was a reason, but this is the book where he says what the reason is. And it is that he had tried to climb the walls and jump off of it, but didn't work. I cannot believe how evil this story is to such a sweetie. Newt starts to act a bit more irrational. He starts to get a little more mad. He maybe starts to fight Thomas a little. They go back and forth, and it ends up with Newt begging for Thomas to end his life. And Thomas does it. And he gets back in the van and he drives away. It just sucks so bad. It's like one of the most memorable scenes I think I've ever encountered. Thomas gets dropped off a couple miles away from the Wicked site, and Lawrence says, hey, actually, it won't be that bad because the cranks won't be out here in the cold like that, so you'll be chill. And he's checking up on Thomas, he's asking if he's okay, if he's prepared to do this, but Thomas is so numb from what he's done, he doesn't feel anything. He's just kind of going on autopilot and doing what he has to do right now. Again, he's in this forest which is so free of disease, it's so natural, and he's thinking about what life would be like if humanity just didn't exist, and how quickly it would go back to a state like this. And he thinks about how most of the life that he remembers took place inside, and how nice the outside world is for the little bit of time that he's gotten to experience it. As he's getting closer to the Wicked HQ, he is followed by Beetleblade, so he knows that they do have eyes on him, but he's confused why nobody has come out to greet him. And something else that's really cool is as he's walking up to the facility, he is looking over at a van that's parked beside the facility, and he's thinking about how that was probably the van that drove them to the Scorch Trials, or to the dorms that they were in before the Scorch Trials. And it's just really cool how this book does that, because it'll do that throughout the entire rest of the story, really, where they're encountering old locations, and the characters will reflect on what was happening in those locations previously. And it's just really cool to kind of have a walk down memory lane like that, where you're reflecting on what these characters have been through as they're revisiting old locations like this. Jansen is taking Thomas to his office, but Thomas asks to go to the bathroom first, and while he's in there, he plants the device that's going to block up the weapons. And then the two of them go to his office, and they talk about him being the final candidate, and Jansen says, unfortunately, the final trick is that they're going to have to take his brain. They said that it was between him and Teresa for who would be the final candidate, but ultimately Thomas's free thinking is what made him the best pick. Teresa, following the rules, saved her. Jansen, at this point, he says the trials were created so we wouldn't have to just cut everyone open, which is such a ruthless thing to say, because the fact is they would be willing to do that if that's what it took. But they try to justify all of this evil by saying that it's for the greater good because they didn't have to kill everybody right away just to possibly find a cure. Instead, they tested everything and they found the best person to cut open. Like, that doesn't make him feel better. Why would you say that? Thomas is using this time to reflect on all of the near-death experiences he's faced recently, all of the moments where his life was coming to an end, and how final this time is, where he's actively walking into it and he's choosing to sacrifice himself for something that, I don't know, maybe could go somewhere positive. He asks why don't they just force the procedure, why don't they just make it happen, but they say they want to respect him. He's somebody that had a big part in creating all of this, and also he's the final candidate, so he's just a cool guy, and they want to give him the space that he deserves, give him time to think about this at least. Now, is it possible that they would force him to do it if he had said no? Probably. But they at least want this illusion of respecting this person who's sacrificing himself. And a part of him does want to do it. He wants to just give himself up, because what if that's what it takes? What if one more death is the thing that stands between all of this being solved or not? Is it possible that by giving his own life, he could save the world? He asks for a little bit of time, which is him coping, but also him trying to buy time before the right arm shows up. And while he's in this room getting ready, he is given a note so he can write his final words, and he writes a little message to Brenda and Minho. He doesn't really plan on dying here. He doesn't really necessarily want to give them final words, but he might as well, right? And then Jansen comes back in and says they can't wait any longer. They have to get started with the procedure. And it's interesting because they seem genuinely apologetic for having this be what has to happen, as if they didn't know from the start that this was going to be where it was going, you know? They hear the right arm breaking in, exploding one of the walls, and instead of being like, hey, maybe we shouldn't have an operation right now as we're getting blown up, they rush the operation, they throw him in, they sedate him. As he's fading out, he's torn on whether or not he wants the operation to work, because part of him obviously wants to live, but the other part of him is hoping that maybe this is the answer, and he just fades out and then everything is fixed. And his final words are, I hope it works, and it's unclear what side he's rooting for when he says that, you know? It certainly seems like he's saying he hopes the operation works, but it could also mean he's hoping that the right arm's plan to stop it works, right? So it's just really interesting to see inside this character's mind, and it sucks that the movie character seems to not have anything going on in there. Thomas regains consciousness on the operating table right as a woman is leaving the room, and when he looks over, there is an extra piece of paper that's been left beside him. It is a map of Wicked with some markings on it and a letter from Ava Page. She writes that the trials are over, woohoo, and that she had stopped the procedure in order to save his life. She created a backdoor in the facility to get his friends and the immunes out of the building, and she writes to take them and leave for a new life through a flat trans. So she has this whole escape route planned out for them. And the thing is, he trusts Brenda, who said to trust Ava. So he's just gonna blindly follow this information from a random piece of paper from a woman who was potentially in the room moments ago, but just ran off to who knows where. But when he looks at the map, he realizes that the immunes are being held in the maze, which is such a cool thing to do. So Thomas is on his way. He's gonna go follow this path made by Ava Page. First step, find the right arm. Let them know what's going on so that he can have a group going with him to do this rescue mission. He gets outside, he sees the hole where the right arm blew themselves in, but before he can get there, he's grabbed by a man and Jansen. And that guy immediately pulls out a knife and says that he wants the cure at any cost. He doesn't care if Thomas wants to or not anymore, he's gonna get it. They go back and forth in this battle, and it ends up with Thomas holding the knife, and he thinks it's ironic that all of Jensen's tests, all of Wicked's tests, have turned him into a killer that now is fighting back. And if there was any doubt on whether or not Thomas could actually kill people, it is gone now, because Thomas throws the blade in the same way that he saw Gally throwing it to kill Chuck, takes out the guy that had initially grabbed him, and then Jansen chases him as he runs towards the right arm. He explains the situation to the people that are working with the right arm. Jansen backs off and I guess just runs off into the forest or something. And the right arm lets Thomas know that they are planting explosives all around the facility. They plan on blowing up the whole thing. And Thomas says, hey, wait a minute. Hold on. Hold that thought. What about all of the immune people that you just put in here? Are they gonna be okay? And the right arm says, well, yeah, if they can get out, they'll be fine. There is no plan to rescue them. They're gonna take down this entire building regardless of who goes down with it. And Thomas is a little bit confused by all of this because they thought the plan was to use up Wicked's resources, not to take down the entire thing, but it's happening now, so be it. Thomas gets into a room that Gally and Vance are in, and he asks Gally to help save all the immune people, and he says, hey, wouldn't you have wanted somebody to come save us? Vince says that if Thomas deviates from the plan, if he tries to fight back against what the right arm is doing, then he's gonna also be seen as a threat. Despite that, Gally says yes, and they go on their way. And then they reunite with Mino, Brenda, Jorge, Teresa, and Eris, and they go off to find the immunes in the maze. They follow these paths that lead them back to the way that they exited the maze, and he's reflecting on all of this, and it says he was a runner again, and despite everything, it felt good. And I love when it does that, or when the characters are thinking, man, I wish we were back in the maze, because that's the thing I've been saying from the beginning. I feel so bad for these characters. I wish they could just stay in the maze because things get so much worse and they don't even know it. So every time they think of the maze, they think of those as the good old days because, I mean, for some of them, that's all they know, right? But even the people that have their memories back, compared to everything that they went through after, the maze seems like a pretty decent place. A lot of them miss that. They miss the friends. They miss what life was like before they had to go through all the trials. Not even thinking about life before that, but just in these past couple of years. Things have gotten so much worse. So I think it's always really cool when they think back about their time on the maze with fondness, right? But they get back to the path that they took to get out of the maze. They see the Griever pods that they had to pass on their way out. They see the slime tunnel that they had to go down and see a ladder right next to it, so they didn't even have to do the tunnel after all. They're revisiting all of these locations and all of these memories, and they're seeing, oh, here's where Chuck died, and here's where this thing happened to this friend, and here's where this Griever did this. Here's that hole that we thought didn't exist, but then it actually did. I love it so much how they're reflecting on all of these things that we saw 2 books ago, right? But you feel it with the characters. You miss all of these things with the characters. You miss how simple it was, how easy it was before everything opened up and got worse, just bad, just so much worse. Mino thinks it's weird that there are no guards around the maze if this is where all of the immune people are being held, but Thomas says that the maze is probably doing that job and they don't need any guards because it took the Gladers years to get out. So he doesn't think that Wicked is very concerned about these people escaping yet. Teresa says how she can't believe they're back in the maze, and around this time Thomas realizes that despite everything, they are back on the same page now. They're both working for the same goal. They're both trying to kind of make amends for the evil that they worked on. They're trying to make up for this terrible thing that they created and that they supported for so many years, because they both realize that this just isn't the right way to do things. In the maze, the holotech is down, so stuff like the ceiling looking like an actual sky is not working, but the maze is still standing tall. Mino leads everybody through the maze, and he's proud, because this is a role that he took seriously for years. He was the leader of the runners. He kind of guided everybody in the glade, and now he's back in that place where he was really comfortable. And it's really nice to see just that immediate confidence shift where he knows what's going on and he's ready to lead everybody back into this final battle, you know? And when they enter the glade, they see hundreds of people that are being held here, not just people their age, but as young as you can get. Anybody that was immune is being thrown into the glade. And they also reunite with some of the old Gladers that were captured and then sold back to Wicked, including Frypan, and I think that is another one of the most terrible things in this book, is the idea that there are people that were living there for years, they had these friends, they had this big escape, and they went through the trials just to get captured and sold and then brought right back to the place that they started. That is one of the most evil things, and I think it's really cool that they made that happen to, I mean, Frypan's not like a side character, but he's definitely not one of the main ones, you know? He's main enough to have made it through all of the books, but he's not really present for a lot of it. But I think it's so cool to have somebody go through the horror of that, and we don't really get to see into it at all. You just kind of have to take a minute to step back and think about what that would be like for him, and I think that's a really cool way to do that. Again, they communicate, they make a plan with each other, they say, here are how many people there are, here are the groups we're gonna split up into, how are we gonna get out of here? They talk about it. It's awesome. But as they're making this plan, the world is starting to rumble because the Right Arm's explosives are going off. And because of that, the walls start to fall down. And they fall and they crush a group of people, which is not good. The plan kind of falls apart because the maze is falling apart onto them, so they all just need to get out as soon as possible. So they try to run towards the exit, still in a semi-organized way so that they don't all trample each other, but they get led out of the maze, down the escape hatch, as the maze crumbles around them. And I think it's really, really cool to have one of the final horrors of the story, to have one of the big tragedies be something that is from the group that's anti-Wicked, where they're so dedicated to taking down this whole facility that they don't even stop to consider how many other people are being affected. And it's like, how are you going to think that Wicked is so evil for what they've done, and then you don't stop and think about the people that you're affecting right now? And also having the maze be their final fight is just such a full circle, like, cool thing to do. It is such a smart move to have them back here. As they're escaping, Thomas and Teresa are leading the way, they're telling people where to go, but when they're in the room with the Griever pods, like down the chute after exiting the maze, the pods start to open up and Grievers start to come out. And Teresa lets him know that there's actually a little handle that you can pull inside of them that immediately shuts them down, and he can grab 4 out of 5 of them before they get out of the pods, but the last one does wake up fully and get out. It takes down a person or two as they're running past, and then between Mino, Teresa, and Thomas, they do end up getting it. Teresa distracts it by full body hugging it and then getting sucked into it, but Thomas says he's seen enough people die, he's not gonna let that be how she goes out, so he fights back and ends up saving her from the Griever suction. And they end up escaping the maze with over 200 survivors, which is kind of awesome. Thomas gets up to the front of the group where Brenda is, and she gives him a kiss on the cheek, so I guess this is a thing now. And then they run through the facility, going up and down stairs to try and get to where the Flattrans is at, where they can finally escape. But the thing is, this whole escape plan is all relying on Paige telling the truth, which in turn means that they have to rely on Brenda because she's the one that said to trust Paige's word in the first place. So it's a lot of just running around blindly and hoping that the people that you believe in are actually worth believing in, and that they didn't get misinformation or that any part of that plan didn't go wrong, and it's a lot of just hoping. But they do get to the Flattrans, and Thomas steps through it just to make sure that he's not going to lead them all into some worse danger or anything. But when he steps through, he sees a shed, and beyond that, just open green land. They start directing people to get through the Flattrans to hurry up before the entire building crumbles, and then Ratman shows up, Jansen shows up, with like 7 security guards, which is not great. And he comes in strong. He says he can still salvage some of the best candidates, which are all in front of him. He has Thomas, Gally, Frypan, Minnow, Teresa, Eris, some of Group B, and then Brenda and Jorge are also here. But the Gladers find whatever they can use as weapons on the ground, and they go up against all of these guards. Thomas, of course, faces off against Jansen, and they go back and forth for a while, but in the end, Thomas chokes him to death. He's full of rage about everybody that he's lost, everything that has gone wrong because of Wicked, and specifically because of Jansen, and he's channeling all of that rage into this fight. Eventually, the Gladers win the battle, and then as they make this final dash to the Flattrans, Mino and Thomas are pulling each other along so one of them will fall and the other will notice and keep them going. And then something falls from above and almost crushes Thomas, but Teresa pushes him out of the way, and all that you can see of her is her head and her arm. He mourns the loss of 3 of his closest friends, Chuck, Newt, and Teresa, as Brenda and Mino drag him away. And the thing is, I think this death makes sense, and I think it's a cool, like, final twist to throw into the end of the story where you think maybe they're all safe and then something bad happens one last time. I think it's a really evil thing to write into the story, but it's also hard to feel any type of way about it because of Thomas's distance with Teresa this whole time, but also at the very end, they were on the same page, and he was sort of happy to be working with her again. So it's a lot of emotional whiplash between the two of them. Regardless of how we might feel about Teresa or how he's felt about her through the trials, it still sucks, right? This is still somebody really close to him. And again, it's somebody who was willing to sacrifice themselves for him, even though this one, I'll admit, was a bit more intentional than the last. And then there are 3 people left outside of the Flattrans, Mino, Brenda, and Thomas, and Brenda goes through first, and then the 2 guys jump together. Brenda ends up closing the Flattrans and then pushing them out of the shed, and then lighting the shed on fire just as a last little safety measure, just to make sure nothing else gets through. And Thomas is a little bit suspicious about this and wonders how she knew how to close the Flattrans, but he doesn't question it. Just like how he didn't question why Brenda said to trust Paige. And in this moment, while they're thinking about everything that they've been through, Thomas decides he's never gonna tell Mino what he did to Newt. Last they saw, Newt is sick, he pushes them out, and as far as Thomas is concerned, that's the last that they saw of him. He's gonna just pretend that that final encounter didn't happen and nobody else is gonna know. And then they're outside of the shed and they're just experiencing a beautiful world. It's just green and it's natural and there's no destruction or devastation from humanity, and they're just gonna start fresh. Mino immediately takes charge of the situation. He starts directing people around, telling them how to start constructing this new life, just like he did in the Glade. And Thomas is fine with it. He's done making decisions. He's done thinking. He doesn't want to have any responsibilities. He doesn't want to know anything. He's out of it. He's opting out of life. He's just gonna let things happen. And Brenda sits down with him and says that there are over 200 immune people that survived, and that this is gonna be a nice, good start. And then they kiss. And just like that, the world goes on. And then, of course, we get our final message from Miss Ava Paige. We have our short little epilogue from her, and I'm just gonna read it. Not word for word, but I'll give you what you need to know. She says, "We have failed, but we have also succeeded. Our original vision didn't come to fruition, the blueprint never came together. We couldn't discover a vaccine or a treatment, but I anticipated this outcome and put in place an alternate solution. With the help of my partners, 2 wisely placed immunes, I was able to plan and implement a solution that will result in the best outcome we could have hoped for. We neglected to see what was right before our eyes, which is that the immune are the only resource left to this world. If all has gone according to plan, we've sent the brightest, the strongest, the toughest of our subjects to a safe place where they can begin civilization anew." She hopes that the organization Wicked has paid the price for the unspeakable act committed against humanity by the predecessors in government. The flare virus was released as a means of population control, which was an irreversible crime. The disastrous results could have never been predicted, but Wicked has worked ever since to right that wrong and to find a cure. But though they have failed, they at least can say that they've planted the seed for mankind's future. And then the final thing that she says is, "I don't know how history will judge the actions of Wicked, but I state here for the record that the organization only ever had one goal, and that was to preserve the human race. In this last act, we have done just that. As we tried to instill in each of our subjects over and over, Wicked is good." Excuse you. What an awesome book. What a cool thing. Welcome to part 2 of this video. I was initially planning on recording both parts one after another, but immediately after recording that, I got sick for a week, but we're back now. The hair is unrelated, and we're going to be talking about the Death Cure movie, which normally when I'm making a video like this and I'm comparing the book to the movie, I'm able to go back and forth and kind of compare them scene by scene, but because we split this book and then movie completely separately, it's entirely because the movie is so different from the book, but it means that I'm not going to be able to compare as much, so this is kind of just going to be a very long rant session where I go into everything that the movie did that I didn't like. Again, I don't mean to bash it if you love the movie. And actually, as I was wrapping up editing for this video, I was doing a little bit more digging into how the movie was made, and I saw articles saying that Dylan O'Brien, Thomas in the movie, was in a really bad car stunt while they're filming that was like terrible head trauma to him, and he was really in serious danger in that stunt, and that it almost put him off of acting just entirely. How he was a 24-year-old that felt like his concerns weren't being addressed. So I'm trying to be nice to this movie, but then you hear something like that and you start to wonder what things were actually like. Where sure, the plot maybe doesn't make sense, but then you actually look at what was going on and maybe the conditions there weren't that great either. And then I don't feel so bad about bashing it a little bit. Because accidents happen, sure, but when you have one of your main actors telling you something and then that concern is being completely brushed aside, and then something bad happens in that situation, kind of hard to feel bad for the movie at that point. It did have quite mixed reviews when it came out. I think it has like a 50 rating or something. It's like a very mid rating, and the main thing that I saw and the main thing that I felt is that it's very good as an action movie, but that's not what it's supposed to be if they were following the books. The books, yes, they have action, but I would say they're a lot more horror, they're a lot scarier, and they're a lot more focused on criticism of the way that things are being run in the world. It's a lot more critical, whereas the movie is a lot more focused on just having another action scene, having another gun chase and stuff like that. And it's like, that's fine, but it's not what I'm here for. I will point out similarities where I can, so if there's a scene that happens to mirror the book, I will point it out. But a lot of this is going to be just me digging into the movie and talking about why I think the changes made it worse. Why I think making the plot go this direction was just not a good idea in terms of storytelling, especially when the base material was so good. So I would get a snack, get a drink, because I have a lot to say about this movie, okay? I have a lot of feelings about it, because I think there are just so many ways that it got worse. Let's just get straight into it. So, the end of the Scorch Trials movie, oh gosh, we gotta go back to that. The end of the Scorch Trials movie, all of the Gladers made it across the Scorch. They got to this safe haven, which is kind of Right Arm affiliated, but they were still like at a temporary place and they were gonna go somewhere more final, is what I remember. And then before they are fully safe, Teresa calls Wicked in and then they blow up the camp. There's a fight that breaks out, and everybody ends up getting away, except for Minho, who is taken on a berg back to Wicked headquarters. And Teresa goes with. She is now back with Jansen and with Ava Page on this berg, off to do evil things, right? And then the final scene of the Scorch Trial movie is Thomas talking to Newt and Frypan and Brenda and Jorge and the guy that's running the Right Arm thing. And he's saying, I know it's stupid, but we're gonna have to go back for Minho, we can't leave him behind. Which does remind us of an earlier scene where Minho had been talking with Thomas in, like, an abandoned building at the start of the Scorch Trials, I wanna say. And he was saying, don't let them take me. So now we see that exact character getting taken, and of course Thomas has to act on it. Though I will say I really don't think his intention has anything to do with Mino's wishes. I think it's a lot more about just his own need to be a hero, which they do call out, and I think it's funny because it's true. When people actually ask him to do something, he seems very reluctant, but when it makes him look good, he's all over it. But we get to the start of the Death Cure movie. It opens up with this big expanse of Broken City, and then we zoom in on a Jeep. Brenda and Jorge are driving along. They're trying to meet up with a train where Thomas and Newt and a couple other people that are in on this mission are trying to break into a train car, which is wicked property because Mino and a bunch of prisoners are being held in it. You don't get any of this explained. It throws you right into the action sequence where they're chasing down a train. It's very much giving Uncharted with how the car is driving by the train and how they end up getting on and how they're shooting the enemies, and it all, you know, again, it's cool for an action movie, but for this to be the start of a Maze Runner movie, it feels so out of place. It just feels like way too long of a dramatic action sequence where there's not really anything happening. At the end of the last movie, we see Mino getting taken, so we can kind of assume this is them on that mission, and you obviously see the prisoners inside of the train car, but I mean, of course, you don't see any of the planning that led them up to this rescue mission. It's just like 6 months have gone by, they have this plan, they're going to save the prisoner, which is what they established they're doing in the last movie. So you'd think a lot of this movie would be about finding and then saving their friend, and then when the opening sequence seems to be them doing that, it just feels kind of off. At one point during the chase, Brenda and Jorge are cornered, but it ends up being a trap, and then Harriet and Frypan and a bunch of other gladers or people that were immune from the camp come out with guns, and then they're holding the guards at gunpoint, which to me didn't make any sense because surely the people that are attacking them are trained and have better weapons and better armor, so why are they suddenly giving up in the face of these children that have some weapons? Then again, everybody in this camp for some reason is trained with weapons. And you could try and justify it by saying that they've had 6 months to prepare, but at the end of the day, they all fully know how to use guns despite, you know, the Glader specifically having no memory of anything. But the second they're handed a weapon, they know how to use it. But then also, I'm assuming a lot of the people in this camp were just regular people, so I don't know at what point they learned all of these skills, because it's not something that you just know. The whole rescue plan leads to Thomas and Newt and I want to say his name is Vincent, the guy that was leading the right arm thing. They tie up the prisoner car that ideally has Mino inside it to a berg that Jorge and Brenda are in, and then they fly it away from the train. As the berg flies off in victory, we get the most boring, underwhelming title card, and then we see all of the guys as they open up the prisoner car and they're seeing where their friend is, except when Thomas walks through the entire car, he realizes that Mino is not inside. And sure, you could say that this is why it's fine to open the movie like that, because they're not actually finding him in the first scene, but still, do you not think it's a little odd that the opening scene is them trying to do the thing that they said they're doing in the last movie? Because my thought would be that the last thing they say in the last movie would be setting up the plot for the next one, so why would they immediately get into it? I don't like it. It feels too abrupt, and it doesn't make any sense for what the story should actually be trying to say. It just wanted a cool opening sequence, and it feels so aimless. And I really don't want to be mean to the people that made the movie, you know? I feel kind of mean for saying all of this stuff, but I just feel so strongly about the book, you know? And that's really where this all comes from, is just I care so much about the book that was written and the story that takes place within that. And so to see all of these changes that, I mean, make everything just seem pointless. I am digging into the movie quite a bit, but it's all for fun, you know? I don't mean anything bad by it. But they get into this prisoner car, they don't find Mino, they do find Eris and Sonia, who are some of the people from, in the book, what is Maze B, in this is just another maze. And Eris is, like, not a character at all in this movie, which I think is very interesting, because in the book, there's kind of this rivalry between him and Thomas because of what happened in the Scorch, but in this, they find Eris here, and he's like, oh hey, thanks for saving us. And the Gladers, Thomas and Newt and everybody, feel kind of like they lack humanity because they're just not excited at all to find these people that they were close to for a lot of the previous story because they didn't find the one friend they were looking for. It's like, well, surely you can celebrate a little bit, right? And to me, it almost would have been better if they had flat out said, we weren't looking for you, like, we're looking for this other person. Yes, of course, they do say, where is he? But it's like, what if they were acting out a little bit and they told their friends they don't care about them because they're looking for this other person? They just feel so disconnected from the fact that they did find people that you'd think they'd be excited to have found, and they just don't really seem to care at all because they didn't find this one person. So then again, thinking back to the fact that this is the whole thing that the movie is based off of, why are we opening with this? Because as a viewer, I don't really even know what's happening, especially if it's been a while since I've seen the Scorch trial. If I watched that one maybe when it came out, and then I didn't watch this one until it came out as well, I'm going into this movie not really invested in the story because all they did was say they're gonna do it. So then to get into this, where it seems like they're totally brushing aside their friends, even though they did just save them from Wicked, and that should be a big deal, it doesn't make sense to me, you know? After they get all of the immune people out of the train car, they are in this kind of makeshift city, this little base that they have where they've been, I guess, collecting people that are immune, or maybe it was just this train and they happened to build the community off of it. It's not really clear what this location is. I mean, I'm assuming it's just an extension of the safe haven that was blown up in the previous movie, where now they're trying to rebuild something. But Vince is giving this pep talk in this makeshift camp that exists by the sea, and he's saying how Wicked wants them because they're immune, but they're going to escape and start over, and he points to this boat behind him, and he says that in a little bit that boat's going to be functional and they're going to sail away and Wicked won't be able to get them again. And it still is a bit hard to feel invested in this plan because we've been gone for the last 6 months and now we're being thrown into it, and they have a boat and they have an actual, kind of achievable plan to get away. I don't know where they're going by boat that Wicked wouldn't be able to get to them. I don't know why they think this is a viable plan, but, you know, they seem committed to it enough to have a boat ready. So I have to assume that they've thought it through, but I'm not really in on the plan. Jorge looks at Brenda's bite mark from the previous movie where she was infected, but she got the serum from Thomas that allowed her to briefly be okay. He checks on it, she looks okay. Because remember, in this, they aren't immune. They aren't actually working for Wicked. These are actually just random people that were found in the Scorch and then joined in on the whole project. So she is infected still, but she looks fine. Eris and Sonia sit down to talk a little bit about what they heard while they were in the Wicked facility and what might be going on, where the train might be going, stuff like that. And they say that someone had mentioned going to a city, which confuses Brenda and Jorge because they say that there aren't any standing cities left. Obviously, this is very different from the book, where they say that there are still major cities around the country, around the world, whatever. The books never really go outside of the country, so it's a little bit hard to know how the rest of the world was impacted by the flare and by the sun and everything, but that's a whole separate thing. But in the movie, they say there's no standing cities left, at all. Which immediately lets you know that this movie is also going to be way off from the book, because the entire thing in the book is that they go to a city that is still up and running. That's the entire part of the book. Aside from them being at Wicked, which of course in this they are not in Wicked right now, the only other thing in the book is them going to a city that exists. So it's just, they're making it very clear we're not gonna get anything that's in the book. And then we also get to see a little bit of Jansen and Wicked and the aftermath of these prisoners being taken, where he is confident that the Gladers are going to come back because they didn't get what they want, and it shows Minho there. Because the whole thing is, while the escape mission is happening, they're cutting in between Thomas and Newt on top of this train trying to take the car away, and then inside, where you see all of the kids yelling for help, so I guess they just heard yelling from the wrong car and went to that one or something. But Jansen is absolutely right, because of course the Gladers are still going, and they're gonna try and get Minho back. Thomas proposes another plan to go try and find Minho, and he's saying how he just wants to travel for 1 week and just kind of feel out what's going on in this place that the train might have been going to, I guess. But Vince doesn't like the idea, and he says that especially after pulling the stunt that they just did, they can't stay in one place forever. They can't hold on to this base while they do one more rescue mission. They have to, commit to either leaving this base or making a new one or whatever it's gonna be. And Jorge lets us know a little bit more about the place that the train might have been going, which is called the Last City. Because despite the fact that they just said there are no more standing cities, I guess this one is still a city that exists, and it's supposed to be the Lion's Den, where Wicked operations take place. So where in the book you had Wicked headquarters kind of out in this forest in the middle of nowhere, and then separately the completely functional, for the most part, city of Denver. In this you have one standing city, and it's where Wicked is operating out of. As Thomas is outside talking with Vince about what to do, what the plan is going forward, some Wicked birds fly, right beside where the camp is. They don't see the camp at all, but it sort of, I don't know, makes it feel a bit more urgent, like they need to leave this base because Wicked is going to find them, which I don't know how the Bergs didn't see the camp at the edge of the water where there's people out, but whatever. Thomas agrees that they can't stay there and then immediately packs up all of his stuff and tries to leave on his own, which I really don't know what the thought process is here. Is he just abandoning everybody and hoping that they move without him having said anything about where he's going or if or when he might come back, or if he's thinking he can get this mission done and come back before they need to leave, or, you know, I don't know if it was just like he doesn't want to drag anybody else along with him for this thing that he's trying to do, because the issue wasn't that they don't have the people to do it or whatever like that. It was that they need to leave the base that they're in right now. Like, they obviously can't take everybody on this rescue mission to find Mino in the big city, so what's the point of just you leaving? They're all still here. At that point, communicate with them, tell them that they should all leave, tell them what their next plan is, and then you go your separate way, but why are you just running off in the dead of night? But his friends know him very well, and Newt and Frypan catch him, and they say, hey, buddy, where are you going? Why are you doing that? We're coming with you, obviously. And as they escape in the dead of night, we also get a flash into what's going on with Mino, where he is in this dream sequence being chased by a griever, and he can hear doctors talking over him, where it seems like by making him relive the horrors of the maze, they are able to better extract serum from him, which, you know my issues. If you watched the last video about the Scourge trials and all that they're doing with the testing, you already know how I feel about the serum in this movie. I think Wicked doesn't seem especially evil in the movie because they have a serum that does work. It does, even if temporary, provide a cure for people. And so when they're putting all of this work into finding a cure that is more permanent, it makes sense to me because they were able to do something temporary, so they're clearly doing something that works. And I think the movie tries really hard to paint them as bad guys, even though in reality the work that they're doing makes sense because it's going somewhere, whereas in the book it seems like they're desperate and they're trying to do all of these things even though nothing is working, and they keep pushing things to the extreme, which is what makes them feel actually evil because there's nothing that comes out of it. They never have any substantial results from all of their efforts, but they keep trying because they don't know what else to do. And they never really explain how the serum works in the movie because you briefly see this room full of people that are being harvested, but it never really says what that means, and I went on about it in the last video, but it never really shows what happens after. Does this mean a death sentence for all the people that are being harvested, or is it just a temporary thing where you can take a little bit and then they're fine? Because Thomas had a little bit of serum extracted from him in the Scorch, and he was totally fine after, so if it's something that you can take that doesn't affect the person, then what's wrong with doing that? Why is everybody freaking out so much over the idea of providing a serum when, if the immune people are able to give it up and it doesn't actually harm them? Obviously, the issue in that case would be consent. It's the fact that they're being taken to give the serum rather than, you know, having a choice in the matter. But if they did have a choice in the matter, I don't see what's wrong with it because it doesn't seem like anything bad comes out of it on their end. Obviously, all of these children are strung up and being used for the procedure or whatever, but at the end of the day, I don't know what happens to them after, and so I don't feel any type of way about it. You know what I mean? So then you get to this scene where Mino is being tortured. He's being forced to relive some of the most horrific things that he saw in the maze, and they're saying that this is less effective than the maze, but it'll do. So now I'm really confused about the serum in this movie, because are they saying that the serum itself is less effective because it's not coming from the brain activity that happened in the maze, or is it saying that the extraction itself is somehow less effective, which in that case I don't really understand at what point in the maze they were taking serum. Like, there was no point where the Gladers were taken out of the maze, so at what point would they have been taking serum from them from within the maze, you know? But also, they were quietly able to take the juice out of the kids in the last movie, so why do they now have to torture Mino to do it while it's still less effective than it was in the maze? I really don't understand what's happening here. I don't know what their goal is. I don't know why it isn't working. And when that's the whole driving force in the movie, it just, you know, you're missing something right here, right? If I don't know what the cure is, where it comes from, why it matters that they do it this specific way, it just seems like you're being evil and torturing him for the sake of being evil and torturing him, which is fine if you just want an evil villain, and that works, again, for an action movie where you just need a big bad guy, but what's the point? In the book, they're fueled by desperation. They
are doing everything because they don't know what else to do, and the flare is slowly taking over, and they can't give up because they've already put this much work in, even though they haven't gotten results. Everything that they do, they feel like it has a greater purpose, whereas in the movie, nothing feels like it has any meaning. I mean, even the Scorch trials were not part of Wicked's trials. That was the kids escaping from Wicked, so we only saw the Maze trials, and then Wicked torturing and killing people for seemingly no reason. So if all you want is a big bad guy, you got it, but I don't feel anything towards it. And I think the book does so well at calling out people in power that are willing to do whatever they want just because it benefits them or because they're so desperate for answers or for whatever. I think the book is really good at doing that while still telling a compelling story, and I think the movie just falls so flat. And you also see Teresa and Ava Page watching as Mino gets tortured, where, I mean, Teresa kind of seems like she's upset at what's happening, like she doesn't really want her friend to be tortured, but she's also letting it happen, and she also still feels like it's for the greater good, which, you know, her character is what it is in this movie, right? I think especially because she is with the Gladers through a lot of the Scorch Trials movie, she lacks a lot of depth throughout all of it. She just betrays them at the last second in the last movie and then is now back with Wicked, so it's hard to feel anything for her. Back to the main guys, we have Thomas, Frypan, and Newt. They're driving to the city, and they pass this infection check, which is supposed to be like, you know, a checkpoint where you see who's infected or not to see who's allowed past this point, right? Except it is totally overgrown and just not functioning in the slightest. There is a board with infection signs, which they did actually have that specific detail in the book as well, which is cool to have something like that be noticeable. But in this one, the signs are vomiting, fever, stomach cramps, erratic behavior, coughing, blackened veins. And there's no mention of it being airborne because in the movie it isn't. Or at least I don't think it is. Because as we saw, Thomas and the Gladers went through the Scorch. They went through the city where nobody was infected. At the end of the day, the only people that were super infected were the people that were in the tunnels. But going through the city, people were behaving fairly normally. They were not sick, really. And then only when Brenda got bit did she start to show signs of this infection. Only when, I believe it was Winston, only when he got bit or scratched or whatever it was while they were running away, that's when he started to show signs of infection. Which also, does that mean that he also wasn't immune? Because I thought it was established very early on that the Gladers are immune, and then when Newt has his theory later, which we'll get into that, but he's talking about how he thinks he was placed in the maze. And so now I'm curious why somebody else was infected from the maze, but whatever. I could just be forgetting details, it's entirely possible. It's been a while since I watched the other movies. There's no mention of it being airborne that I could see, at least on this sign. Obviously a huge difference from the book, where it is airborne, and that's why the second they go into the Scorch Trials and they enter the city, it's almost certain that they are infected, because in the book they don't think that they're immune, so they're immediately told that, you know, regardless if you already have it, you will have it by the end of this trial because you're going through this place that so many people are sick, it's gonna happen because it's in the air. In this, it is not being transferred by the air as far as we have seen. There's nobody at this checkpoint. It's just a big dark tunnel that they have to drive through, and Newt makes a comment. He says that's exactly where he would go if he was a crank. Oh my poor sweet boy. They drive into this tunnel, which is full of cranks, what a surprise, and this scene kind of mirrors where they're driving with Lawrence in the book, which is towards the end of the book, but when the cranks all like part ways for them and then get onto the car. I think this scene is meant to be mirroring that, but it's, again, a bit out of nowhere because it's at the very start of the movie. It's the first time we're seeing any of the infected people, at least in this film. But also, it's been a while since we even saw them in the last one, right? Because so much of the end of that last movie was them getting to the safe haven, and the enemy there was Wicked, not the people that were infected. And I have to wonder, why are there infected people all around the infection check, you know? Like, obviously, the check-in place is not running anymore, so, you know, they could be drawn to the tunnel, and that is what it is, but why? We see a similar thing to what happens in the book where they get surrounded, where In this, the car ends up flipping over because Frypan is just not looking where he's driving. But the car flips over, Thomas gets out, Newt gets out. He's kind of holding his arm, but I would assume it's just because he hurt his arm because a vehicle just flipped over onto that side. And then as the Cranks are moving in, Frypan pulls out a massive gun, shoots a couple of them, realizes obviously a big gun does not work in a situation like this, and then they try to run away. They get surrounded, and then the Cranks all just stop and kind of look at them, which, you know, takes away a bit of the urgency here. And then Brenda and Jorge drive in and say, hey, you guys totally abandoned us, but it's chill, get in the car, let's go. They give Thomas a little bit of a stink eye for trying to run away from them. I don't know why they knew he was here or anything like that. And Jorge says that that was the last defense of the city. So if this place is overrun, then the city probably is as well. And I'm just getting quite a few mixed messages about the state of cities in the world, because I was told there are none at all. And then I was told that there is one and it's the last city and that's where Wicked is. And now I'm being told that if the check is overrun, then the city is also overrun. So, like, how powerful is this city if it's so easily overrun to where you see this checkpoint the way that it is, which it has been this way for a while. Look at it. How are you gonna see that and then say, oh, the city must also be, like, I don't understand really what's going on, honestly. It seems like they're trying to raise the stakes by saying that things are really bad and that nothing exists anymore. But then they still need somewhere to go, or else the movie just wouldn't be anything, right? Like, it wouldn't exist because the characters wouldn't have anywhere to go or anything to do. So they're saying one thing, but then they still have to try and find this workaround to get to that place so that they can carry on with any type of plot. It just doesn't seem consistent, you know? Because he says that that check was the city's last defense, and then they immediately drive and see the city, which is now surrounded by a giant wall, and they're like, oh, actually, that's new. And that's Wicked's strategy to keeping the city safe. So actually, they're chill. And I know in this, Brenda and Jorge were not part of Wicked, so they're not as tied to the rest of the world as they were. They're not as informed because they have just been in this random city that's been broken down. But I don't know. Don't act like you know everything if you don't, right? Like, who are these people? How can you talk as if you know so much about these cities? Like, do you or not? I mean, I don't even have anything funny to say about it. I'm just genuinely confused because they act like they know everything about these cities, and then every single time they come across something, they are just completely off, and then they talk about it as if they were right the whole time, and I'm just so confused and frustrated. How can you say there are no cities that exist, but actually there is a city, but oh no, it's overrun, so now it must be overrun, and then you see walls, and you're like, well, I guess they're chill after all. Like, at what point did those walls come up, and you didn't know about it? But you did know that the city was standing, but then getting all worked up about some city walls. Wonder where I've heard that before. We do see a little bit into the city where they say that the walls are just a temporary solution, and Ava Page is talking about how infection rates are up 300% and nobody is allowed inside of the city anymore. I would love to know more about the city, who is allowed in, what are the regulations, what is the city, where are we, why is this the last standing city? Is it just because Wicked operates out of here so they put the money into it, or is there something special about this location? Who were they letting in up until this point? If there is no check, right, if that was the last defense, are they just inviting people through the walls until they're at capacity, or what's their new way of seeing who is and isn't allowed in? Like, why does it matter now that nobody else is allowed in when I don't know who was allowed in to begin with? And they say that Minho A7 may be their breakthrough, and they're extracting a new serum from him that might be the answer. Paige and Teresa are sort of presenting this to the head of the city. I don't know. There's like a whole little council meeting here where they're saying, hey, we want the city to help fund the trial to try and get this new serum because it might be the answer that we're looking for. And the city wonders if they should actually use the resources for something a little bit better, like maybe safe zones like the city they're currently living in, rather than testing for a serum that is not working, even though it is working. They're saying, hey, the city that we're living in right now works pretty well, right? Like, we're safe in here, relatively. So why don't we put our money into making other safe zones so that other people can live safely? And Teresa steps in and is like, hey, this is totally temporary and people are still gonna die and we don't need any safe zones if there's nobody alive, so we might as well keep making this cure because otherwise there's nobody to live in the safe zones, which completely disregards the fact that by living in safe zones you're probably gonna stay alive, so then you don't need a cure, because whatever. She says that the infected outnumber the healthy, and so they'd only be delaying the inevitable by building these safe places. But if you actually have regulated cities and you put the money into it, I don't know why you couldn't have functioning cities that are not going to be full of infected people, because they do have ways to know who is or is not sick. And especially because up until this point, we've only seen it spread through biting or through scratching or, through, like, wounds. It's not airborne. What is the harm in building more safe places and then just regulating them? Obviously, you won't be able to let everybody in, but people will be alive, rather than having one remaining city and everybody in that city is also dying. I don't understand it, but it's interesting because it seems like the people leading the city kind of have a right arm mindset, because in the book, that was what the right arm was working for. They were saying they want Wicked's resources to better allocate them to things that matter, such as, safe places for people. Why run infinite tests on people when the results are just not happening, when you could just work on the people that are still alive, right? Yes, a cure is good, but at a certain point you kind of have to cut your losses and say, well, what can we do now? Because this clearly isn't working. But again, in the movie it is working because they have something that does at least temporarily cure people. So sure, invest your time, invest your money. That doesn't make any sense to me. Pick one or not. You have a cure that is kind of working, and that should mean something. Why would you make a cure that works sometimes? Not in the plot, but as the person making this movie, why would you decide that they do have a cure that works for a little bit? What does that do besides making it seem stupid that anybody is against Wicked when they have something that works? In the book, they're desperate, but nothing has come out of it. In this, they have an answer, so why would we not let them continue? Because it seems like they're on the right path. It just doesn't make any sense to me that they would have kind of a cure, because it worked. I can only say it so many times. It just doesn't make any sense to me, because the whole thing that the story is based off of is this idea of finding a cure, and from the start of what we've known about it, they've had one. It's not perfect, but it does work even for a little bit, and that has to mean something. I don't know. Maybe I'm just too worked up about that specific point, but it just doesn't make any sense to me. And then while they're having this conversation, like after they do the proposal to the city, Paige offers to take Teresa's memories because she seems kind of sad about everything that's going on, and Teresa says she wants to keep her memories so that it's all worth it in the end, which I don't really know what that means. And also, the talk of memories does not ever come up again. So what's up with that? A big part of the Death Cure book is that they have this block of their memories. They don't know anything before the maze. And the very start of it, they are told, hey, you can remove this wipe. You can get your memories back. Or not. And the main characters choose to hold on to that memory swipe. They don't want to know the past. They don't want to know what came before, because what if it changes their current mindsets? And also, that is part of the reason why they go to the city, because they need to get the chip out, because they need to have Wicked not tracking them. And part of the memory swipe is also just removing this chip so that Wicked doesn't have any control inside of their heads. So it's just, you get to the movie, and they don't mention memory at all. There's one single time where a character mentions, you know me before you remember. But other than that, it doesn't talk at all about Teresa and Thomas knowing each other before. It doesn't talk about Thomas setting up the maze. And I honestly can't even remember at this point if they have their memories or not. Such a big part of the Maze Runner movie and book is the fact that they don't know anything else. This is all that they have. So in the movie, did they get their memories back at some point? I know Thomas was stung and that gave him kind of a glimpse into the past. Did that give him everything? And if so, then what about all the other characters? Do they remember anything? Do they ever get the opportunity to? If they do remember, then they should surely be talking about it more. And if they don't remember, then why don't we know that? It should be made abundantly clear, because that's something that mattered from the very beginning. The fact that I don't even know if they have their memories or not is, it seems like bad storytelling. Again, it's been a little while since I've seen the movie, so I could be forgetting, but that's a big thing to be forgetting, so the fact that it doesn't stand out then would be also concerning. Like, it doesn't work. You can't fully take away characters' memories in the opening movie, and then not even 2 movies later, I don't know what the state of that is. Because then you get to the scene where you see Teresa getting the offer to have memories removed, and it just reminds you that you don't know what's going on with any of these characters. Why does Teresa have her memory? And then she's being offered to have them taken away. But then I don't know about any of our main characters. I'm assuming that Thomas has his memories back because he got stung and, but then I don't know to what extent. Those are, like, cool things about the book, and I don't know where it goes in the movie. I feel like the manipulation of their memories is a really big part of the story, and it just doesn't seem to exist. But Thomas and the group go to the outside of the city walls, and it's surrounded by people that are angry, and, some of them are living normally, they're just walking along the streets, but some people are angry at the city for leaving them outside to die. I still have my frustrations with this whole thought, because I don't know who was allowed into the city or not, if it was a money thing or if it was just a population thing where they couldn't take anybody else in. If that's the case, then that was a very recent decision, so how many people were flooding into the city up until this point? Like, I just don't really know what's going on. And again, it's totally possible that I missed all of that information, so if you have watched the movie and you have the answers for my confusions, please let me know, but I truly am lost. Because I know where the idea for these frustrations came from, but I'm just not seeing it play out. In the book, the city has very, very regulated, like, check-ins to enter and exit the city, at least for a while. So there actually could be infected people outside the city that are just not allowed in because they wouldn't pass the checks. And the city is meant to be a regulated place where you can't get in if you're infected. But if there's no checks to get into the city, then I don't know why can't they get in? Why are they so upset? Why are they left here to die? When also, these people are not infected. As far as we know, these are all healthy people outside of the city walls, so I don't understand why it's so urgent. Because from what we know, you have to get bit, and none of these people are going around biting each other, so I have to assume they're all fine. Because also, everything that we've seen shows that the flare develops really rapidly. Like, over the span of a couple of days, you get very, very sick. Within, like, one day, your entire body can get, like, covered in the scary veins. So it seems like everybody outside of these walls is still healthy, and I guess there's the threat that somebody who is sick could come up and start biting, but it just doesn't seem all that urgent, I guess is what I'm trying to say. While they're outside of the city, Thomas's neck, like, the tag on the back of his neck glows, which means that the Wicked drone above them found him, it tracked him to there or something, and they're in this crowd, they're trying to push through to the front to try and get into the city, and I was honestly very confused watching this. My partner had to help me out here because they're walking through this crowd, they're trying to push through to the front so that they can get into the city, and then there's, like, guards walking alongside them that Newt notices and he tries to warn Thomas, but I initially thought these guards were also part of Wicked, as if they got tracked with the drone, and then immediately Wicked's people were on the ground trying to get them. But then separately, you have Wicked and the people inside of the city that are trying to take Thomas down. So what ends up happening is Thomas gets to the front of this crowd, and then Wicked and the city guards take fire. And, I mean, they have massive guns on top of the city, and they just start shooting. They totally miss Thomas, so it's a lot of shooting for not a lot of results. It does wonders for crowd control, but, I mean, not really effective. Thomas, Newt, all of them get away, they hide, and then they are immediately kidnapped by the guards that had been tracking them, and to me, I saw this and I thought, oh, Wicked immediately captured them. Like, in all the chaos, Wicked found them and then took them, but actually, this is a separate group. These are the people that were upset outside of the city when they're going around saying, oh, the city is leaving us to die, they forgot about us, all these things. This is that group. They get to a quieter location, and then the guards unmask, and it's Gally as one of the guards, and then a bunch of other people. And this reveal makes Thomas even more mad than he was about being kidnapped. He is so upset. And he goes in to try and attack Gally, and he's saying how you killed Chuck and all this stuff. But Newt tries to defend Gally by saying that he was stung and he was out of his mind, he didn't know what he was doing, which is obviously different from the book where Gally was straight up being controlled by Wicked. He was forced to throw the dagger that killed Chuck. And Thomas has already, attacked him after that happened during the book. They're immediately more on the same page, and they both apologize to each other because they realized that it's just a result of how Wicked was treating them, and it's just, that's where they were at the time. Obviously, it wasn't ideal, and they still feel how they feel about each other, but it's not necessarily rage anymore. Gally didn't like Thomas because he knew how Thomas was related to the creation of the maze, and Thomas didn't like Gally because of what he did to Chuck, but at the end of the day, they can both kind of agree that it's something bigger than them that they were forced to do. Whereas in the movie, Thomas never had time to take out his anger on Gally, so now he tries to beat him up. And in the book, Gally knows that the group is coming. He sent a message for them to collect them, to bring them to his apartment, to be like, hey, what's up? But in the movie, he doesn't know why the group is here, and they have to explain that they're trying to get Mino out of the Wicked facility. And the thing is, in the book, they were, willing to meet up with Gally. They wanted to know, is this the real him or not? But in this, Thomas wants nothing to do with Gally. He still says he doesn't want to work with him, even though it seems like this is a guy that has a lot of resources that could potentially be very helpful. They still end up working together, but he just doesn't want to at all. Gally explains what happened to him after what went down with the maze. He says that he was picked up by a group that was going to the city, and they realized he was immune and brought him to Lawrence. Now, I don't really know what that means. I don't really know what picked up by a group going to the city means. It doesn't necessarily explain how he got away from Wicked, but sure, go off. They go to meet Lawrence, which, if you remember that name from the book, that is the driver guy that took Thomas back and forth when they're, like, making the final plans with the right arm. In this, Lawrence is the leader of this rebel group, which they never say what this group is, so I don't know if this group is meant to be the right arm or if this is just, like, a group. They don't put a name to it that I can remember. They go meet Lawrence. Gally warns them that he doesn't get a lot of visitors, and the man is introduced by saying the "Rose took my nose" line, which is something that took place in the book in the Scorch Trials when Thomas and Brenda are in the sewers. And they're being chased by cranks, and they hear this voice saying, "Rose took my nose, I suppose," and it's a crank without a nose, and he's coming for theirs, right? And it's this really scary visual, and I mean, that line is so memorable, and for some reason, they have it here with the main person running this rebel group that's trying to take down the city, and he doesn't have a nose. He's very infected. Like, he looks like he should be very much past gone, but he's hooked up to an IV that's, I guess, keeping him okay, which then, of course, I have questions about the infection itself, because if you have the serum, it doesn't cure you physically, but it does cure you mentally, or what's up? Like, you see this guy, and he looks unwell, right? But then his mind is totally intact, and it's because he's getting drip-fed the serum, I guess. But I just don't know what the serum is capable of, because if it's able to save people that are that far past gone, then, I mean, really, Wicked is on the right path if they're able to do all that. Sure, it can't fix the cosmetic stuff, but it doesn't need to if it can make people not want to eat you. So whatever. This guy is the leader of this rebel group, and he's a combination of a bunch of other characters that were kind of side people before that didn't really mean all that much, but, like, why are we picking up all of these different traits from other characters rather than committing to, I mean, at that point, just make a new man. You don't have to use every name from the books, right? Like, come up with your own phrase. If you want it to be all that, why are we doing this? It doesn't feel exciting to me. It doesn't feel like oh, he said the line, because this isn't where the line is supposed to be said, you know? So at that point, I would much rather you come up with a new person, just totally different from the books, because this is totally different from the books. Come up with somebody that they can still look like this, they can still act like this, but give them a new name, give them a little bit more of a backstory. If you need to give them a scary catchphrase, do it, but I think it was kind of corny considering that the man speaks regularly and he's coherent, and, you know, why did he say that? Was he just trying to be spooky to introduce himself to these new people? Like, I don't understand why that had to go there. But they're talking about this plan to get into the city. The group wants to get in for their own rebellious reasons, and Thomas obviously wants to get in to find his friend. And they're going over the logistics of how do we get past the walls, how do we get past the Wicked guards, all of this stuff. And Thomas says that he can help Lawrence by providing serum, which Lawrence doesn't really, you know, he's like, do I really need that? Obviously he is, like, having enough to keep him well right now, so one way or another they are getting the resource that they need, so I really don't know if Thomas could provide anything for him at this point. But Lawrence says that 2 people can go on this mission to get into the city to see if it's possible, and the rest will stay behind, kind of like, I don't know, like when you leave your card with somebody to make sure that you'll actually come back for the thing. I forget what it's called, but he's holding on to the rest of the group to make sure that they come back, which doesn't make any sense because they don't, I guess, so that they come back so that he has the serum from Thomas, but I don't know. It doesn't end up mattering because nobody stays with Lawrence. Like, this doesn't come up again. They say 2 people can go, the rest will stay, and nobody ends up staying, and actually that room is never seen again, and the people that stay behind are also never seen in this location again. So it's just, it doesn't make sense. Like, just say that 2 people can go and leave it at that, but don't come up with a reason that doesn't go anywhere, because in the book they say a limited people can go, and the reason is because they need to be stealthy. Okay, there's an obvious reason. Now, hey, we're breaking into a city. Why are we not using that same reasoning? Why are we coming up with Lawrence is holding people captive so that you come back? Like, that doesn't make any sense. It doesn't go anywhere in the movie. And you had a reason that's obvious and it's in, like, it's already written for you. Why does he say that? Thomas and Newt go together, which is kind of the only obvious answer. In the book, there was a bit of a back and forth where in the book, Thomas immediately decides he wants to go with Brenda. They were a good team in the Scorch. They'll probably be a good team here. And also they kind of have a thing at this point. And Minnow kind of steps up and is like, well, what about me? I'm an awesome teammate as well. and Thomas doesn't like his anger and thinks that it could be something that comes back to bite them. So he says, actually, you need to stay here with this group for the whole other setting that's happening, unrelated to being held captive. But he says, hey, you stay here, you watch over these people. Versus in this, there is no debate at all. It's just, oh, our two main characters obviously are going to be the ones to go on this mission. I do wish there was a little bit more variety. Obviously, I love Newt, you know, I'll take him where I can get him, but I mean, really, this movie, all three of them lean into, these are our main named characters and the rest don't matter in the slightest. It does kind of, you know, especially when the whole idea is that they're being put through trials as a group to find the best candidate for the serum, it really just pushes away all of the group side of things, which is interesting because I was talking about how in the Maze Runner book versus movie, in the movie, everything that they do is as a group where, you know, they're going in and out of the maze and everybody is waiting there for these people to come back, versus in the book, everybody's kind of doing their own thing and just hoping that it works out. So I think it's interesting that in the first movie, they're so reliant on, here is a group, and here is everything they're doing together, and, you know, everything that happens, they're all there, versus the two following movies, and, I mean, everybody's gone. It doesn't really address where anybody went. It's just, you know, if you're not a named character, you don't exist anymore. And it does kind of take away from the fact that this is supposed to be something they're all going through together. And then, again, before they enter the city, Newt is kind of holding his arm awkwardly. It seems like something is wrong, but they don't look at it at this time either. We do see what Teresa is up to in Wicked, and she's trying to cure this little girl, Shy, I think was the name, who is infected, and they try to give her the serum. It seems to be working within, you know, a couple minutes. It seems like she's up and fine. And they're excited, because it seems like at last a serum is working, which doesn't make any sense to me, because they already had a serum that works temporarily, and this is still, from what we can see, temporary, because it only just took effect, and just, like, why are we freaking out over this? We know that something works. You don't know if it works long term, so why are you excited now when you already knew you had a serum that works for now? And Paige also makes fun of Jansen for opening fire on a massive crowd and still not hitting Thomas because he's still out in the world. They didn't end up getting him. Then back to the city, we have Gally leading Newt and Thomas to find this potential way that they can get in. And the city is up and running, and, you know, the technology is working, and there's people commuting to and from work in full suits. Some of them are wearing masks, but other than that, it looks just like a regular city. Gally offhandedly is like, act like you've seen this before, which is kind of how Brenda and Jorge had reacted when they took Thomas to the city, because he's reflecting on the fact that this city existed and he's been in them before, but he has no memory of it. So this is his first time seeing civilization just functioning normally. And I do like that Gally says it. However, again, I wish we could see a little bit more into Thomas's head, especially with how that whole perception is affected by the lack of memories, or in this, assuming he does have his memories, you know, like, they would have seen it before, so now I'm thinking they can't remember? Because Gally does have his memories back. That's something that was established. Because if we're assuming that getting stung means you get all of your memories back, then surely Thomas would have seen all of this before, but then if that's the case, is Gally just making fun of him for reacting to a city that he already knows because he does remember them? Or if he doesn't remember them, then it's a valid thing to say because he actually hasn't seen it. Like, I don't know. Again, going back to the memory thing, I don't know what the state of their brains is, and it takes away from all of this because I don't know what they do or don't know exists up until this point. We don't know how shocking this environment is because we don't know how familiar he is with it. The guys try to sneak around the city even though they're hiding behind glass walls where they clearly would have been seen, but they're sneaking around, and Thomas is still being petty. He's refusing help from Gally, even though they're relying on each other right now for this mission, which is all about surviving through, you know, everything that they've been through. Thomas is still being petty to the end. They do find the building where, you know, would be held, the Wicked headquarters or whatever, and it's covered in soldiers and surveillance, but Gally says he might know a way in, and it's by using Teresa. As they're talking about a plan to get into the city, Newt kind of lashes out at Thomas over something. It's really out of nowhere, and again, it is pretty out of character for him, so you can see how the infection is taking hold, which, again, it moves so much faster in the movie than the book. But Newt apologizes, and he grabs his arm again as he's leaving. And then Thomas meets him outside, and Newt pulls up his sleeve and reveals that his entire arm has, the infection all over it. He's talking to Thomas, and he says he wonders if maybe he was just put into the maze kind of as a control, as a test variable, so that they could see what happens to the people that are or are not immune. Something that was established in the book as just a fact. Some people are immune, some people are not, and the reason is we need to have that control. But the thing is, this infection doesn't make any sense, and it doesn't come from anywhere. And that, it does such a major disservice to the character and to the story. Because the thing is, up until this point, the only people that have gotten infected are people that were bit, scratched, whatever. So we can assume that it has to be transferred through that type of physical contact. It is not airborne up until this point. So when did he get it? At what point did he get infected? You see it all on his arm, so you could assume that he was bit on his arm, but we never see that. We never see a crank even get anywhere close to him. In the book, it's established fairly early on at the beginning of the Scorch trials that everybody is infected, and if they're not, they would be by the time they get through the trials, because they're gonna have to go through the city that is full of infected people, so it doesn't even matter, you're gonna get sick regardless. But the thing is, it takes weeks for that infection to set in, so even in the Scorch trials, knowing that they're infected the whole time, it takes until the end of the Death Cure book for Newt to fully succumb to the illness. He doesn't start lashing out like that really until the Death Cure, which means all throughout the Scorch trials for the entire 2 weeks that they're out in the heat and they're getting sick and all of this stuff, he's not showing any signs of being infected. And then once he does start lashing out, they have an explanation for why it progresses so rapidly, and it's because of all of his brain activity. Whereas in this, we were told that the Gladers are immune, or at least that's what I think. I truly cannot remember where that information came from. And again, I don't know why they would do it. I don't know what it really adds to the story besides taking away any of the stakes, because now they don't have to care about the thing that they're trying to cure. The whole point is that they're trying to find a cure for this disease, so if they know from the start that they're immune, obviously, if that's the reason why Wicked wants them, why they're in these trials is because they're immune, sure. But what good does it do to tell them that? Because now as a viewer, there's no suspense seeing them around other sick things because you know that they're not going to get it, but also we don't really even see that many sick people throughout the movies. Because the movies are not about the infection at all. They're action movies and they're zombie movies more than anything else. It's not about how the flare is being passed around, and it's not about finding a cure, and it's not about how the government is choosing to handle things, and that's what the book is all about, but it just doesn't translate to the movies at all. And the thing is, you can you have to assume that Newt got infected in the tunnel where they're with all the cranks, because that's the only time in this entire movie that we've seen people that are sick. But there's never a time where they're close to the car. He does hold his arm when he's coming out of the car, but my thought would be that he fell on that arm, the car falls to the right side, which is the arm that he hurt, so I would think, okay, he just fell on his arm, and that probably hurt him, and now he's holding it as he gets up. And I looked it up too, and I was trying to find anybody else that has an explanation, and I couldn't see anything, and it was just people saying maybe it was a cut scene, maybe it's something that got cut out of the movie, which doesn't make any sense, because this is a major thing. Why would you cut out the way it happens, the reason that this scene exists? This is one of your main characters, right? I thought we cared about the main characters. Why would we cut a scene that explains why they got infected when they shouldn't even be able to get infected? So it's possible there's a scene where something happens that we don't see, that also none of the people around him noticed when it occurred. It's possible that something happened in a previous movie that's only just affecting him, which wouldn't make sense with the timeline for how the flare has been developing with the people that we have seen. It tends to move fairly quickly, so if he got infected in a previous movie, surely he wouldn't only just be reacting to it. Some people were saying maybe he got scratched in the car crash, and then because it's airborne, it got in through the scratch, but that doesn't make sense because it's not airborne. I don't know at what point he gets sick. And when one of your main characters gets sick with a disease that they've been trying to cure through all three of these movies, you should know where it happens. So if I'm missing something, please, out of anything, this is something that I need an explanation for. At what point does he get infected? If he gets bit, why would they not show it? If it is suddenly airborne, why does it affect him on his arm? What happened? I don't understand. In the book, he is told at the start of the Death Cure that he is not immune. He knows that the flare is eating away at his mind, and you see the slow progression of the sickness. And it is so well done for such a lovable character, and it hurts so bad every time you see him because you can see how he's slowly losing himself. And this feels so out of nowhere because it just doesn't establish where it came from. It's really hard to care about something when you don't have an explanation for why it is that way. Obviously it sucks that he got sick, but I don't feel very strongly for it right now, at least, because it's just confusing, you know? Am I supposed to feel like it's a tragedy because it happened at all? Or do I deserve a reason? I don't know. It's frustrating. Thomas is a little concerned. He's like, why didn't you tell me? But Newt ultimately brushes all of the worry aside. He says, it doesn't even matter. We're doing all of this to find Minnow to save him, so don't even worry about me. If there's any chance to save him, and not me, do it no matter the cost. That's kind of what he's implying, is like, if you have to leave me behind, if you have to do whatever, if you have to choose one of us over the other, take Minnow, save him. Back at the Wicked headquarters, we see Teresa meeting up with Minnow. She tells him that she's excited to report that his cure that they extracted from him is working, but he's unresponsive. She tries to say a couple of things, he's not even looking up at her, and then as she's leaving, he calls her over, and he tries to attack her, he calls her a traitor, all of these things that are completely valid. And I do appreciate the actor's commitment to the character's rage, because that's like the one thing that actually fully lines up with the book. This character is supposed to get mad. And then guards are rushing in to pull them apart, and before they can get him, he grabs something off of the table. I can't remember, like, what exactly it is, if it's something that Teresa had brought in or what. It's something sharp off the table, and he manages to hide it before the guards get to him. And then right after this meeting, Teresa is called back into medical, and Shy has turned into a full-blown crank again. She is back to being sick, so the cure didn't really work. Not surprising, considering the fact that they were reacting after it worked the second it worked, as if they haven't had that for a while. For at least 6 months, they've had a cure that temporarily works, so I don't know why they were so excited. If anything, this worked for even less time, because Brenda was told that she would need, like, every couple of days or weeks or something, so why are they so excited about a cure that works at, like, am I missing something? Am I not understanding how all of this works, or is it just that, like, back and forth with how the rules work? Clocks out from her 9 to 5, and as she's walking through the city of regular people going about their business, she sees Thomas in the crowd. She kind of briefly looks to the side where somebody is getting quarantined and, like, actively being taken down, but nobody pays it any attention. Some of them have their masks, some of them don't, but everybody's living relatively normal life in this pretty normal functioning city. I would love to know more about this person that was being taken down, because if they're infected, who found that out? How did they find that out? How did this person get into the city? Because I don't know the regulations for who is allowed into the city, so, like, I guess that's their way of showing, oh look, people are infected, it's a problem that the city is now facing, but nobody seems to care, nobody is running away, nobody is, I mean, even alarmed in the slightest, so I really don't know what the problem is, because, I mean, to me, this is, I guess, supposed to be the person that Thomas sees in the cafe that gets infected, but the second they spot somebody that's infected, everybody runs out of the building, because they're either immune or just aren't sick up until this point, but they don't want to catch it. So the second they hear somebody else is sick in the building, they evacuate as soon as possible. It's meant to be a regulated city, so the people that aren't sick and don't want to be are getting out of there because something clearly went wrong. And that's obviously a sign that the city is falling apart a little bit, because despite the checks, they have infected people getting into the city. But there's, like, an immediate reaction from the people within the city. So it's odd to see this where somebody is getting quarantined and it doesn't affect anybody else in the slightest, you know? Like, nobody even looks, really. There's no urgency, despite the fact that the people running Wicked and all of this are saying that the city's going to be overrun. I don't know how. I don't know why. They're just saying it, and we're supposed to believe it, but then the things we're seeing don't align. Teresa follows Thomas down into an isolated hall. He asks, do you regret what you did? And she said yes, but also she would do it again. She thinks that what she did was right, and he likes that answer. I think it probably absolves him of some of the guilt of what they're about to do, because they put a bag over her head, and they kidnap her as well. Before we see what happens with that, we are taken back to Jansen and Ava Page looking over the top of the city. They're looking out at the walls, and Page says that the virus is now airborne, and it's inside the walls, and the serum that they're getting from Minnow or whoever is their last chance. Hey, what do you mean it's airborne? It hasn't been. At what point did it become airborne? If you're saying that as though it's always been airborne and is just now getting into the city, I don't know how walls saved you for this long, but also nobody is sick outside of the walls. If it has always been airborne, why did Brenda only get sick when she got bit? Why did anybody only get sick when they got bit? Why was the city in the Scorch Trials able to still function? I mean, there were people, you know, like, being vendors and, like, going about the streets, and it wasn't perfect, and it was still kind of dusty, and the cities had fallen apart. That's a result of the sun flares, not the sickness, because nobody there was infected. They had one infected person tied up in the city, in the party, that was just, like, a funny thing to fight at or whatever. But the fact that they have somebody infected that's tied up in a party, surrounded by people, I would assume that means it's not airborne. Which has to mean that it became airborne at some point between the last movie and this one, or the last conversation in this one. And at that point, if the virus is, if it's able to evolve in that way before they're able to contain it, then sure, I would say give up on Wicked, because there's no way they're gonna develop a cure faster than it takes them out. If it's evolving like that, that's a completely different conversation. But up until this point, it has not been airborne. And I mean, that statement doesn't go anywhere. They say it's airborne, they say that it's in the city, but it doesn't go anywhere with that either. You could easily tell the story without having said that, and it would go the same direction. So what is the point of throwing that in now when it hasn't applied in the past 2 movies and it doesn't affect anything going forward? And how can you say that this serum is the last chance when you've had a serum that works a little bit up until this point? And just, she's talking about how the serum is the last chance, and then Jansen is talking about how they have 28 immune people still in the building, which I guess is everybody that they have left after what Thomas and the group took from the other train. He says they have 28 people and they can get some more and they can keep on working, keep trying to find a cure, but Paige thinks that he's going a little bit far with this. He's kind of a little too devoted to the cause. And she says that he would hunt down every immune if he could, and he's kind of proud of that, honestly. She seems like she's given up on all of this, and he says as much, but she says that at least they gave people the tools that they need to survive. I don't really know what that means. Who exactly has the tools? Because you just said the city's doomed, and you just said you should stop with your efforts to get a cure. It doesn't seem like you really have anybody on your side. Who exactly are you helping right now? Who has the tools to survive? Are you saying just because you have people that are immune and they exist, that they will survive? Because you didn't do anything for them. I don't get it. I like the thought, but I mean, she's just saying words, you know? She says it's not about giving up, it's about knowing when you've lost. Okay, so now what? Like, what did you do? And what are you doing now, if not giving up? Because you're still a company that has the resources, so are you now pivoting and trying to build safe places for people around the world, or what's up? Because if you're not doing that, then I think you are just giving up, unfortunately. It doesn't make any sense. She's making this dramatic statement, but then she's not doing anything differently. So yeah, you are giving up. And it sucks because in the book, she's not even a character that you see. She's somebody that exists only in the letters, only in, like, the background of doing what they're supposed to do for the company. She's the one directing people, but you never see her in action. And that makes her cool, you know? And she's not cool in this. She doesn't really make sense, and it sucks because she could have been. But the things that she said, specifically in that scene, just, it's so, like, aimless, you know? It doesn't really mean anything. It doesn't go anywhere. So how am I supposed to feel anything towards her when I don't know what she's even doing anymore? We go back to Thomas and Teresa and the whole group there, and they take the mask off of Teresa's head. They ask for information about where to find Minho and what the building is like, how the facility is guarded, all of that information. She tries to warn them about security and specifically about the tags in their necks, and they say, well, you can help us with that, and they make her cut them all out. While this is all happening, Brenda and Jorge are, like, off to the side, and they have a sad moment where Jorge leaves, and it's cute, for sure, but we don't know why. It's, like, part of the plan that they have that was not really established, so we're just gonna see it as it happens, which is something that this movie loves to do, and it just doesn't work. Why should I feel anything for this big emotional moment when I don't know why they're parting ways? Teresa looks over at Brenda and says, hey, she looks healthy. Where are you getting the serum to keep her that way? And Thomas says, no, she hasn't gotten anything since we first gave it to her in the Scorch, which Teresa can't believe because there's no serum that they have that works for that long. Surely she should be sick or dead by now. It's been over 6 months and she looks perfectly fine, so something's up. And because Thomas is the one that provided the serum for her, Teresa's immediately interested in Thomas and what's going on in his body, so when she finishes cutting the chip out of his neck, she manages to sneak away a piece of, like, a napkin that was used to clean up the blood on the back of his neck. She hides that in her pocket for later. And then Brenda and Thomas have this moment for, like, 2 seconds where she asks if he's in love with Teresa, and he says he doesn't know, and then she says that he has a habit of staying with people longer than he should, and that's, like, the only interaction that they really have. In the book, they become lovers by the end of it. Like, they've been through a lot together, and they're actually, like, caring about each other because they're working towards a similar goal, and they're both equally devoted to the cause and everything like that. And he feels betrayed by Teresa throughout all of it because of everything that happened in the Scorch, where he just realized he can't trust her ever again. But in this, it's this constant back and forth where, Brenda barely matters in this movie, let's be so for real. She could have been a lot cooler, and she really was dulled down quite a bit, but you have Teresa who betrayed them at the end of the last movie, and then you get to this one where I guess Thomas never got over her because she never did anything bad enough to where he cares. He is still kind of torn on his feelings about her, which is interesting. Because I don't even really care about her as a character at this point because she just has lacked substance throughout the entire thing, so it's hard for me to even care about her as a character, so the fact that she's still considered kind of the love interest in this doesn't really make sense for me. But the guys use Teresa as a way to enter the Wicked facility. They have guard disguises on, and then Teresa can obviously walk around wherever she wants. So Gally, Newt, Thomas, and then Frypan is off doing something separate. Brenda is off doing something separate, and Jorge has gone off on his mystery plan. But the three guys go with Teresa through the facility. At one point, Newt coughs in front of Teresa, and that kind of clues her into the fact that he might not be doing so well, but they don't talk about it. So we see the trio in the building with Teresa. We see Frypan going and climbing up something, doing something, unclear. And then Brenda is downstairs in the parking lot trying to steal a bus. They're running through, like, a stairwell. Gally gets open a technical panel and puts something on it that allows Lawrence to get full control of the facility, which is kind of similar to how in the book Thomas planted a machine that takes out Wicked's weapons. And then because of that, the guards think that the cameras are glitching, but it's really just the guys being disguised on the screens, and then they end up breaking into the guard room and shooting all of the guards before freeing the immune people that are stuck in their cells. And still, despite all this effort, Mino is nowhere to be found. He is not in the cage that he's supposed to be in, and even Teresa is shocked by this because she actually did think he would be here. They look on the computer and it turns out that Mino's been taken to the opposite side of the building to be harvested to the max, honestly. He has been taken to get a procedure done that could potentially kill him, but Jansen said they have to just hurry up and do it because they need what they can get. Again, Thomas demands that Teresa take him to go find their friend, and Newt wants to go with, but he says that he has to wait with Gally for the serum, which I don't know where they're planning on getting the serum from, so I don't really know what that instruction means, but Newt says again that they're doing all of this for Minho, and so he's not going to be left behind because he'd be more useful on this rescue mission going to find their friend, I guess. Gally wishes Thomas good luck before they split off. Thomas does not reciprocate it because he still is just petty over nothing. Like, I guess he has more reason to be upset in this than in the book because it was actually Gally's choice, but again, if he was infected or he was stung or whatever you want to say, you can forgive him a little bit, right? Surely you can understand that you've both been through quite a bit and come together at least on this. Newt, Thomas, and Teresa are in an elevator. They're going to find Mino, and then Jansen enters that same elevator and they have an awkward little standoff. Jansen whispers to Teresa that Thomas is in the area, that Paige didn't want her to know because she didn't want Teresa to be distracted, but he says, if you happen to see Thomas, if Thomas tries to contact you, can you let me know? And, you know, obviously Thomas is right behind him, but they manage to get out of the elevator, and then as they're walking to the lab or to where Mino's being held or whatever, So Teresa is walking with them. She's trying to explain that the serum that they have right now won't save Newt, but that Thomas's blood is different because Brenda should have been dead by now and she isn't. So Teresa's saying, hey, your blood might be different. We could run some tests. We could see if maybe there's something that's going to work in this. And Thomas gets so mad that he pulls off the guard mask, so now he's totally exposed to everybody in Wicked that this is the guy that they're looking for. He argues that Wicked is going to keep on sacrificing people, but that there's no cure, which doesn't make any sense because they have a serum that's worked up until this point. He has to know it was temporary because when they gave it to Brenda, they said that you're going to have to get this every so often. He can see that Brenda is well at this point. They have at least a temporary cure, so you can't say that there's no cure, and you're also not sacrificing more people by running some tests. If Teresa only wants to run some tests on you, that isn't sacrificing anybody else and could potentially be the answer because you saw how your blood reacts differently to this person. How are you going to say that you don't believe Teresa when you had all the information and you're now seeing it in front of your eyes the same way that she is? It couldn't possibly be a trick because you both received the same information, so why are you coming to such a wildly different conclusion? Whatever, it's stupid. Jansen got suspicious of Teresa and the two guards, and when he comes around the corner, Thomas is unmasked, so obviously it's him. Jansen comes at them with a gun. Thomas ends up holding Teresa at gunpoint as a way of keeping the guards away, but Jansen calls his bluff, which I believe does happen in the book as well, because Thomas loves to threaten people, but he can never actually follow through with it. But Teresa ends up shoving Thomas and Newt backwards and then pulling like a fire alarm that brings down a wall. So now they're protected from the guns, but they're also locked in whatever this place is that they just got locked into. They're not like closed off anywhere, they can still go around, so I don't know what this door is used for, but Teresa told Jansen that she did them a favor and that now the guys are trapped. So I really am unsure of what that door is, but it's fine. She says that she needs Thomas alive, and then she goes and runs tests on that little bloody cloth that she had taken earlier when she cut out the chip in his neck. So Gally is up alone in this room now with the 27 immune people that were in the cells, and his mission is to get to Brenda down in the car park, and she has this bus. So they get down there. He is so cool. He's so good at leading all of these kids and keeping them safe in such a high-stakes situation. He loads all the kids onto the bus, but they don't know where Thomas is. Brenda hasn't seen him, Gally hasn't seen him, so Gally says, you stay here with the bus with all of these kids. I'm gonna run back and find Thomas. And Brenda makes it seem as if she would never leave without him. And it's like, that is a really dumb move on your part. Dumb on Gally's part for saying to stay, dumb on Brenda's for agreeing. Because you're breaking into Wicked facility. You have all of the immune people besides one at this point, but like, why do these characters not value the lives of any of the other kids that are being put through these trials? It was the same thing when they rescued the kids off of the train. If it's not the one person they're looking for, they don't seem to care at all. Despite the fact that this is a major improvement, even if they could save every other kid besides the one, that would be incredible. And obviously it's not your dear friend, but I mean, you know, celebrate the victory a little bit. Try to care a little bit about all of these other people that could potentially be taken to a better life. Why are we putting it all on the line for one guy? But I guess at this point, they're also staying for Thomas more than anything else, because it all comes back around to him. I just think it's silly, because a bus escaping out of the building is not quite as inconspicuous as just some people running out. So at the end of the day, because you just stole a bunch of children and you're now trying to break in to stop this medical procedure to steal the person that they need the most, obviously the building's gonna go into some sort of lockdown. Why would you not try to get the bus out while you can before they've noticed that the kids are gone? Because they had no problem getting the kids out of the cells, getting the kids down to the bus, getting them loaded up. Why would you then just sit there when, you know, if the parking garage sees any sort of security, they're gonna notice a bus. You could easily get the bus out before anybody notices, and sure, they might see you leaving, but at that point you're already gone. Why would you wait until you're noticed in the car park to then decide to leave, which is what ends up happening. Brenda is parked there for no time at all, and then some guards come down and they say, hey, there's a bus here with a person in it. That's kind of weird, and they walk over, and then Brenda rushes out of there. It's like, you could have done that like 2 minutes earlier. And she's like, oh, sorry, Thomas. Okay. You waiting for Thomas is not worth it in the slightest. At that point, if he's lucky enough to do what he's doing and still have time to get down to the bus, I really doubt that bus is going very far, you know? At that point, he and then you would be such a target, it doesn't make any sense to stay there. So she rushes out of there. She's now driving all of these kids around. Back in the Wicked facility, we see Thomas, and he's running again. I don't know what the firewall did to lock him in at all, because he seems to still have full access to the building. He briefly locks eyes with Ava Page, but then just keeps on running like it's nothing, because Jansen is also on the other side and starts shooting. There's a lot of running and shooting in this movie, and it just feels kind of aimless, but it's okay. Mino is actively going under for surgery, but he's fighting the sedative. He hears his friends in the halls, and he uses the sharp thing that he had picked up when he was meeting with Teresa to attack the people that are putting him down. It looks like he ends up making one of the doctors sedate themselves, which is the same thing that happens at the start of the death cure when Thomas is going in to get his memory swipe removed. Brenda is in there and she fights back by sedating one of the doctors. So if that is what it is, it's a cool thing to see. Again, Thomas and Newt are pros with their guns. They're able to seamlessly take out every person that comes near them, despite the fact that the guards are wearing protective armor. Like, I really truly don't understand how they're so good at doing this. It really does just feel like a video game, you know? It's video game level of action and of accuracy. And they end up reuniting because Mino has broken out of the surgery room. He knocks a guard through a window because he's so mad, and then they all see each other again. They're running from Jansen and the guards still, and they end up locked in a room where, I mean, they're like stories and stories up, right? It's a very tall building, and they're quite a ways up, but they've just locked themselves into a room. There's nowhere else to go, and Thomas proposes that they just jump out of the window. There is, like, a fountain or a lake of sorts at the bottom of the building, and following Minecraft logic, if you jump down that, you should be fine. As long as you hit the water, you won't take any damage, and that's kind of the logic that they use here, because as Jansen is breaking into this room, they all commit to just jumping out the window, and they all make it into the water. And the thing is, even though they're in the water and, you know, they're fine, Jansen and the guards look down and don't try to shoot them at all, despite the fact that their heads are now poking out of the water and they're significantly slower than if they were running around on solid ground. So I really don't understand why. Like, was it just not worth taking the shot? Also, you have launchers, which is electricity, so why would you not shoot the water? Am I missing something here? Do you just suddenly not know that you have weapons, or what's going on? Or is it still that they're listening to Teresa and are trying not to kill Thomas? I guess that would be the only thing that really makes sense, is if they don't want to shoot from a distance or they don't want to do anything that totally takes him out in the water because they need him alive. It's just like kind of a funny moment, and Thomas looks up and gives him the finger and then they swim away. And it's like, this doesn't really make sense for like all the action that just happened. Again, it's giving action movie like you just escaped in the nick of time type of thing. But what I will say is it's really cool to see how Newt is progressively getting worse as each scene goes on, where you can see like the veins in his face and you can see on his neck getting darker. I think that's really cool how you can actually see the progression of it throughout the last half of this movie, because obviously when he first shows it, it's on his arm, but you can see how it's snaking up his head, and I love that. I hate it, but I love it. Immediately after getting out of the water, Thomas and the group are surrounded by 4 more guards, and they're like, oh man, you gotta be kidding me, which doesn't make any sense because you're escaping a highly secure building, so obviously there's more guards around. But one of them turns out to be Gally. He takes out the other 3 guards and then they run away. As the guys are running, Jansen announces to his guards, and I guess to everybody, that they're now in lockdown and nobody can leave until the guys are found. And I'm assuming this is a citywide lockdown because they've clearly left the building already, but then I have to wonder how much power does Jansen have over the entire city to be able to enforce a lockdown like that? I don't know. Again, it would help to know the rules of who is or is not allowed into the city, because we were already told nobody's allowed in, so who's regulating who leaves then? Like, where is this instruction going to? I'm not really sure. We don't see it enforced, we don't see anybody leaving, so I don't really know. And somebody says, don't worry, we already have eyes on the bus, and he didn't even know there was a bus gone missing. Jansen was so caught up in catching the guys as they found Minnow that he failed to consider that they'd want anything else. So it's a shock to him when all of the immune people are just gone. We go back to Brenda, who is now in this massive police chase around the city, and all the wicked guards are coming after her, and then she ends up getting surrounded on all sides, and it happens to be in exactly the place that she needs, because you'll have to bear with me because I don't like this part. It's frustrating to me. She is surrounded on all sides. They say, hey, get out of the vehicle, drop your weapon, all the standard stuff. She tells the kids, just stay here, stay down, hold on a second. She steps out, and the thing is, she has what looks like a gun in her hand, and they say, hey, drop your weapon. Instead of dropping it, she very slowly, I guess to not look like she's being a threat and not just like coming at them, she very slowly raises it to the sky, and then shoots it, and it's a flare gun, and it goes off. It's like, okay, obviously she was going to shoot it at the sky. They should have caught on to that a lot sooner. Why did they not shoot her immediately? Also, she had enough time to shoot a gun. That is obviously a signal for something, and they just thought like, oh, well, it's not pointed at us, so it's chill. Like, why did they not take action way sooner? Regardless of if she was going to use it or not, regardless of if it's a weapon or just like a signal, surely because she didn't drop the weapon, you want to act on it because that was the instruction that you gave. It's not like you need her alive, so why did they waste any time talking to her or letting her do that? It doesn't make any sense. But she shot that flare gun to get the attention of Frypan, who was on top of some building manning a crane. So now he knows exactly where to lower the hook. She attaches it to the bus, and she has enough time to attach it to the bus and then run back inside, and she's still not getting shot at all. The guards are all yelling, hey, stop that bus, stop it. And I like, okay, you have weapons, like why are you yelling at them? Frypan picks the bus up with the crane vertically, so he hooks it on the front of the bus and then pulls them up so that they're straight up and down. If this is how you gotta do it, then this is how you gotta do it. But he lifts them out of danger. He only hits them into a building one time, which, you know, that impact alone would be enough to severely injure some people, but he ends up, I think, lifting them outside of the city walls. But then as he's lowering them, the part that the hook is connected to on the bus starts to come loose, and he's like, oh no, this bus is gonna fall off of the crane, so instead of it falling, let me drop it gracefully. So he lets the crane go as much as he can, they plummet towards the ground, and then he catches it at the last second, I guess to stop the impact of the fall, which the impact of the crane grabbing the bus would still be enough to rock some people. And then of course the impact of the crane grabbing the bus is enough to rip off the front of it that it was hooked to, so they still end up hitting the ground, not as fast, But they did still have to deal with the impact of the initial stop, right? So now they're getting that one impact, and then the impact when they hit the ground, and then the bus is still upright on the ground, and it still completely falls forward, and even that much impact would be enough to take some people out. So the fact that everybody stands up and is totally fine and they all just continue on like nothing happened is so absurd. Part of the appeal of the story is that it's a little bit nasty, you know? Like, part of why I love the book so much, it's not afraid to make you uncomfortable, and then you have something like this where people should have died. There is no world in which the bus moves in this way and everybody is fine. I would have loved if they played up the horror in this movie, but they just like got rid of all of the stakes so that nothing matters. Then even you get an action sequence like this and everybody is fine. It's like, yeah, okay, this is an action movie for sure. There is nothing to be said here. You had a dramatic scene, and sure, it looks cool, but just think about it for 2 seconds and it doesn't make any sense. I said this in a previous video, but I really truly would love to see these movies remade nasty. I want to see them with all the blood and gore that they're written with. Because these books are uncomfortable. They are not easy to read. They're still, you know, they're young adult books, sure, but I mean, they are not friendly. And I think you could make a really good horror movie with the material, and instead they went action, and it's just a poor choice because, I mean, no offense, action movies a lot of the time tend to lack plot because people just want big explosions. But what about everything that the story was trying to say? I just know how cool it could have been if it really leaned into the other side of things. And instead it seems like these movies completely erased all of the horror elements. We see the guys running around the city. Gally says that the escape tunnels are around 12 blocks away, and then we see Mino and Newt kind of catching up after all of this time that they've been apart. It's really sweet. I wish those guys could have gotten better, but Mino goes to Thomas, asks how long Newt has been sick, and Thomas, I mean, he seems to be in denial. He's trying to say that Newt will be fine, they just have to get the cure, they just have to get back to Brenda with the serum, which I don't know why Brenda has the serum. I don't know if it has something to do with Gally getting the kids, or if Brenda just happens to have serum on her, or if I just missed something there. I don't know where that's coming from, but they just keep saying we have to get to Brenda, she has the serum, like she's gonna make this better. We see Newt getting violently ill at this point, and it just sucks because in the movie there is a cure, at least a temporary one. But even the fact that Teresa is telling Thomas that there could be a more permanent cure, there is something in his blood that makes him different, that could potentially save Newt, he just needs to give in to a couple of tests. It's not even that he has to give himself up, it's just they have to see if it's possible. He won't even do that, and we're watching as Newt gets more sick. In the book, there was literally nothing that they could do to save him. And so it was so much more devastating. This is devastating just to get a visual of him being sick, but it's also just infinitely more frustrating because they do have an answer. There is a way that this could be prevented, and it's just not happening. Mino, of course, didn't know that Gally was alive either, and asked why Gally is helping them, but Gally just says nobody's perfect and then runs off, and that's the end of that conversation. Brenda manages to drive the kids back to the base where Lawrence and everybody was staying, but there's no sign of Thomas or any of that group that was staying there. And then we see what Lawrence is up to, and he's sneaking around outside of the city. He reveals his face in front of this crowd, and then he starts hyping them up and saying that the city abandoned them, it forgot them, and they're gonna go remind the city who they are. He also seems offended that the city calls sick people cranks, which I don't know if that's meant to be an offensive term because that's just like a standard thing that they say in the book. But also, is he saying this as the people outside of the walls or people that are infected? Because it seems like he's speaking to just people who are not infected but are outside of the walls, but he clearly is infected even though he has the serum, so, you know, I can't get into it again. He says that the people within the city started the war, but this group is going to finish it and then leads them into battle. They all start moving towards the city, which the city tries to use their big guns again to do some more crowd control, but because Lawrence had already taken control of their systems, they're not able to use the technology anymore. And then, kind of Hunger Games style, Lawrence rides his chariot with his torch into the city wall, except it's not a torch, it's an explosive, and he blows up the entire wall with himself. Now, was this necessary? No. Is there any reason I should really feel for this character? No. Do I know what the mission of this group is besides to, show the city who, like, no, I don't know anything. They're mad at the city because they were forgotten, but I don't know what the rules are that kept people out of the city. Lawrence was infected, but he had serum, but chose to blow himself up symbolically? Question mark? The explosive would have worked without a person holding it. Why did he do that? And then Gally sees the explosions, and he's saying he's worried because the plan was just to take down Wicked, not the entire city. So the whole city exists, Wicked is only a part of it, but now this whole rebel group is blowing up just the entire city regardless of who it is. So it just seems like this group is so aimless, because at least in the book, when Gally is talking to the main guy that's leading the right arm, they have a plan and it is kind of aggressive. And sure, they get to a point where it's like Thomas is a little bit surprised at what's happening because he didn't think that they were going to blow everything up. He thought they're gonna just like rebuild, but then he sees everything exploding and he's like, well, that's not exactly what I had in mind, but we can work with it, and then he goes from there. But the fact that Gally, who, I mean, it seemed like he was kind of an authority in this group, didn't even know the plan, it's just a bit confusing, because does that mean that Lawrence hadn't communicated the plan up until he blew himself up, and that sort of led people into battle? But for what? Like, just to go out in a blaze of glory? Like, what's the reason for doing all of this? It would help if I knew why they weren't allowed into the city, if I knew why they're mad in the first place. You see how it all comes around? If you don't explain one thing that the entire plot is based on, it gets a little bit murky. You know, stuff like how the sickness works, stuff like where the serum comes from, or how well the serum works. If you can't have solid ideas on those things, how can you possibly have this story exist? It's inconsistent, you know? It's very difficult to follow because nothing is clearly established. We see Paige and Teresa talking as the city is blowing up, as the Wicked headquarters are starting to blow up. It's just not looking good. I don't know how this group had so many explosives on hand. I don't know how they have this much power. We didn't really get to see how big this group is, or, you know, I mean, the fact that Gally didn't even know that this was the plan makes me a little bit confused as to how they're able to execute it so well. They see the destruction around them. Paige is urging Teresa to leave, but she says, look, I tested Thomas's blood. This matters. We have to get him. His blood is not only able to, like, match the virus, but it's able to destroy the virus, and they need him because that is a cure. He straight up has a cure, and they've discovered it. They know that he can stop the flare virus. He can actively remove it from people's bodies. Like, this is something that they now know for a fact. He is able to cure people. The Gladers are still running through the city, but now with all of these people breaking in, they seem to matter a lot less. The guards are a lot more focused on the people throwing explosives around, so they're able to sneak around a little bit more easily. Thomas is able to contact Brenda and says that they won't be able to make it and that everybody else should just get out while they can, but Brenda says she won't leave him. They reference back to that other conversation that they had about how she shouldn't leave him even when she should. But it's like, there's no romance here with these characters. That's not really something that the movie leans into because they're still trying to get you to root for Teresa in the end. So it's hard to really feel anything about this interaction because, again, it's like Brenda should have left without Thomas in the bus. It all just feels kind of very one-sided, you know? It feels like Brenda cares about Thomas, but Thomas will never get over Teresa. And that's something we saw in the party in the Scorch Trials, where he's with Brenda and then he's still thinking of Teresa, but at that point in the book and the movie, that was before Teresa truly betrayed them, and Thomas realized that he can't feel anything towards her anymore. So you have to kind of assume that the betrayal that happens in the movie was not enough to, like, make him lose interest in her, which is interesting. Again, something like that would, I mean, be more justified if we knew the state of his memories, if we knew if he's more on Teresa's side because he can remember the same things that she does, or if he's just blinded by love or something. As they're talking to each other, Jorge pulls up outside of Brenda's hideout with the Berg. And she's like, okay, we got our escape plan, go meet us by the tunnels. And then Vince is also there. Vince is the guy that was part of the right arm safe haven thing that they were at the end of the Scorch Trials. He was at the start of this movie. He was the one that was kind of running the little thing that they had by the seaside, but then Jorge just says, yeah, I picked this guy up, so now he's here. And it's like, that didn't need to happen, though. Why is he here? Like, the last we saw of him, he's saying that the group needs to leave because Wicked's gonna find them and they have to, you know, they have to think of the group. They have all of these immune people. Why is he here? Is it suggesting that the immune people have now been moved to somewhere safe and he feels okay to leave them? And even if that is the case, at what point did they meet up? You know, at what point did he... I don't get it. They just ran into each other or what? He also doesn't need to be here. Like, there's nothing that he does in this. He truly was just picked up along the way, and that's it. He's just another character that they felt like they needed to have in this ending sequence, and he's such a nothing character. Like, he doesn't provide anything. Newt is so unwell at this point. He's being dragged along by Thomas Amino. He's saying, just leave me behind. It's not worth it. You guys run ahead. Go save yourselves. That type of thing. He's even struggling to breathe at this point. He is just so unwell. And Thomas tells Mino and Gally to run ahead, go get the serum from Brenda, and then bring it back here to Newt. And almost immediately after they leave, Newt is fully losing it. He's yelling at Thomas and he just looks so out of it, but Thomas tries to keep him moving. And it is at this time that Newt yells and he gives Thomas something and he says the "please Tommy, please" line, which is his final words in the book. It does still hurt to see this character in this way and saying that line and kind of calling back to how tragic the book was, but it doesn't hit the same because I don't know what he's asking. In the book, he was very clearly asking for Thomas to take his life, to not make him suffer anymore, to not let him become somebody that's more infected. You know, he doesn't want to lose his mind to this infection. He's saying, "Please, Tommy, please don't let me go on like this." In this, he handed Thomas something, I don't know what it is, and he's saying please, but not really saying what he's even asking for. So it's hard to feel the same way because I don't know what's going on. Like, yeah, it's emotional because you threw that line in and because he looks so unwell, but in terms of the plot, I don't know what's happening right now. It is still devastating, though, to see him asking and begging to be left behind and all of this stuff with his friends, because, I mean, come on. That actor is such a sweetie, the character is such a sweetie, and to see him just get so much worse, it really, really sucks. I mean, it is really brutal to see. Thomas ends up dragging Newt to the front of some building, away from all the chaos. It's just the two of them. Newt falls to the ground, and it really just, it sucks to see. You know, I really hate this. Not in the same way that I hate the rest of the movie, but hate it as in genuinely, it's emotionally tolling. It just sucks to watch because you just care so much about this character. I don't care about much in this movie, but I will always care about this character. And then Thomas hears a voice over the speakers from the city, and it's Teresa saying, "Hey, could you please come back? You can possibly save Newt. Like, you have something that can actually for real save Newt, so if you could just come back over here." She says that he did save Brenda, that he could actually save people, and it can all be over if he just comes back. And then I guess as he's standing there considering this, Newt stands up behind him. He is now fully angry, evil, infected mode. They fight. Newt is kind of going in and out of being conscious and being fully infected. He does still ask Thomas to take him out, but at this point it's kind of frustrating because he asks, Thomas doesn't do it, which we've seen before. We know how that went in the book. But he asks, Thomas doesn't do it, and then Newt manages to grab a gun and puts it to his own head, but before he can do it, Thomas knocks the gun away. So not only is he refusing to do it, but he's not letting Newt take his life into his own hands, you know? It's just frustrating because Newt asks Thomas, "Can you take me out?" Thomas says no. Newt then gets a gun during the fight, tries to get himself. Thomas knocks the gun away. So then Newt pulls a knife on Thomas. Newt has this knife and he's fighting Thomas, and in the fight he ends up like slashing in a way to where the knife gets caught between the two of them and he accidentally stabs himself in the chest. I guess I say accidentally loosely because I don't know how intentional it was. It was kind of just smushed between the two of them. I guess it's supposed to be dramatic where you kind of can't tell who gets stabbed, but it just sucks. And I feel like it takes away so much from the character who was so aware of what's going on with the infection, because obviously it takes place over the course of weeks. So the entire time Newt is saying, I can feel myself getting lost. I can feel the infection taking over in my head. He's aware enough to know how it will affect not just himself, but his friends. He doesn't want them to see him like that. And he asks to be taken out before it gets worse because he doesn't want to live that way. He doesn't want to, be a backseat in his own head. So to then take that and put it into this, where it's like, yes, it's still frustrating and kind of devastating to see in his final moments what he's asking for and how Thomas isn't able to help him, but the fact that his death almost looks accidental, it's just kind of, I don't know. It still sucks to watch, regardless of, how you see that. And then, of course, right after Newt dies, Brenda shows up with the serum, and it's a little too late for that, Brenda. Still don't know where she even got the serum, but it ended up being for nothing. And then Thomas just walks away, walks the other direction and leaves. And the one thing I do like is that after Brenda shows up, after Thomas leaves, you see Frypan and Mino and I think Jorge show up, and Frypan and Mino fall to their knees in front of Newt's body. And you genuinely feel sad for a second because they've been through so much together, and now they see him on the ground and there's just nothing that they could have done. It really sucks to see. And I do think I might prefer that more than the book, because in the book, Thomas ends up taking out Newt and then deciding that he'll never tell Mino what happened. He'll leave his friends thinking that Newt just got lost to the flare and that was the end of it. He just became sick and that was it. Like, he wants to leave it vague what happened. And I feel like them knowing does matter. Obviously, he's trying in the book to protect his friends by not letting them know what happened, but, I mean, for one thing, you shouldn't have to carry that burden of what you had to do to one of your closest friends, but also, like, I feel like they deserve to know. And that also would mean that Thomas has to admit to, you know, going and finding Newt even after he had communicated that he doesn't want them to see him like that. And it would mean having to admit to this terrible thing that you've done, but you did do it. And also, it is what he wanted at the end of the day, so I don't know. I kind of like the transparency of this, where they do see him, and they do know what became of him. I don't care for much in this movie, but I did care about that. And then we see where Thomas ran off to, and he took the gun off the ground and then went straight to Ava Page. And I made this joke with the people that I was watching it with, but I was like, he has an enemy tracker on where he knows exactly where she is, because why did he find her? She's in the middle of this dark, totally abandoned building, just like standing there looking out a window, and he just finds her. Like, I don't understand how he knew exactly where she would be right then. But he goes at her with the gun. He asks if it's true that he would have been able to save Newt, and she says that he can save them all. He kind of gives in to her. He's like, okay, that's fine. Like, I'll go with you. Can you just promise not to touch the others? Which nobody mentioned the others. This whole time, Teresa's been asking, hey, can I do some tests on just you, you know? She never said, everybody give yourselves up. Because at the end of the day, their goal was never to, like, bring everybody back or anything like that. They've only been asking for Thomas to offer a little bit of blood for some testing. So it's nice that he's concerned about other people, but that was never really a threat in this movie, at least. Aside from Mino being taken, it's been a while since anybody that they know was being tested, you know? Because they didn't seem to care about the people that were immune that have been in Wicked, so it's just, I don't know. It's a weird request when all of his friends have been with him the whole time. Even, like, Teresa being with them in the Scorch, where it's like she wasn't even taken away to be used as part of the trial. She's been with them the whole time, so it's just, that's like a minor irritation where he's just so worried about his friends getting caught up in it when they are not really the point of interest right now. But he agrees to go with her, and then immediately she is shot and killed because Jansen has snuck up, and I don't know why he shoots her. I think he's just kind of being petty. Because my understanding is that they're on the same page, where yes, she feels a little bit more hopeless about all of this, and she feels like it's time to give in and admit defeat. And he's a lot more devoted to the cause, but at the end of the day, they both were still looking for a cure. They both still wanted the trial to work out. So I don't really know why he had to do that, other than to, I mean, the same reason he had to shoot somebody at the end of the last movie. He just needs to show that he has power in the situation. And I do think it's used just to solidify that he, or that Wicked, but mostly just him at this point, is evil. And just to kind of be like, oh look, they do bad things. That's kind of how it feels. But Jansen holds Thomas at gunpoint and then sneak attacks him with a sedative and takes him out. And when Thomas wakes up, he is on a medical table with Teresa over him and Jansen over to the side. They say they're going to take special care of Thomas and that they're going to save the people that they choose to save, because obviously he's not going to have enough to go around, so they're going to have to be selective. And that the flare will eventually burn out, but for right now, it's just going to be a matter of deciding who will be left standing. Which is like, yeah, sure. But also, you have a cure that's gonna work, and it doesn't seem like Thomas needs to be drained of it, so just do it in moderation, and then slowly give the cure out to the people that need it most, and then still work on creating those safe havens, especially if you only have one person right now that has an actual viable cure. Take care of him, slowly dish it out to people, and then work on keeping the rest of the population safe, right? Like, yes, there will still be people that get infected that you can't get to, but why are we making it seem as though Thomas has to be totally drained and then we can only cure that many people and then the resource is gone forever? It's not like a finite thing. It is going to keep being made inside of his body, I think. Again, don't really know how the serum works here. My thought is that it's similar to just regular blood, how humans can lose a lot of it and then it just comes back, because that's just how bodies function. So if his body is just like a serum machine, then just do it a little bit at a time, right? I don't know. We can't get into the logistics of all that, but Jansen is standing there. He reveals that he also has the virus. He shows his arm, which I don't know why the arm is a popular spot for the infection to start taking place, because Newt didn't seem to get bit, so I don't know if it's just that now it's airborne and now they're getting infected through the arm or what. But before he can give himself some of the cure, Teresa knocks him out. That lasts for maybe 2 seconds as she tries to get Thomas out of there, and then Jansen immediately stands up and feels betrayed because he thought Teresa was on his side. It ends up with this whole chase scene where Jansen is hunting down Thomas and Teresa as they run throughout the medical facility. The walls of the building start to blow up because the rebels have made their way in, I guess. Thomas briefly realizes that he's been shot, but they literally do not linger on this in the slightest. They just carry on. He's like fading in and out of consciousness for a while, but then he gets up and carries on as usual. I don't know. I feel like, especially after everything that they've been through at this point, that would probably take him out. That would probably be the last straw. They enter this room where there are a couple of infected people behind a glass wall. Jensen finds Teresa in there and he threatens her. They're kind of going back and forth. He's threatening Teresa, but then at the last second, Thomas throws something and it's in Jensen's direction, but it misses him. And that's because it wasn't actually aimed at him. It was aimed at this glass wall that's holding the two cranks back. And you'd think maybe they would be like bashing on the wall and that's what breaks it, but really Thomas's throw was just so strong that it had a delayed effect where it cracked the entire wall open. I don't know about all that. So the two cranks are released from their holding cell. They immediately take hold of Jensen, and that's the last we see of him. Kind of underwhelming for a character that has been so evil this whole time, you know? And I guess it's kind of cool to see, like, oh, the big bad guy is taken down so easily by this thing, but in the book, Jensen dies because Thomas chokes him. That's so much more personal. He's able to take out all of his anger, he's thinking back on everything that was done to them, and he doesn't stop even after the man is dead because he's just so caught up in everything, and I feel like that is a lot cooler. I mean, come on, he deserves that. They've been through enough. They deserve a little rage and anger. Oh my gosh, we've made it to the final scene of the movie. I cannot believe. So Teresa helps Thomas, who still obviously has a gunshot wound, helps him up the stairs to the top of this burning building because, as everybody knows, when a building's on fire, you want to go up. Where the smoke is going, that's exactly where you should be as well. They go up because the stairwell is blocked by fire, but it's like, in what situation, when a building is on fire, have you ever thought that up is the correct direction? At that point, jump out another window. There is no world in which you should go to the very top layer of a building that is crumbling beneath you. And then you get this, like, dramatic final scene where Teresa is holding Thomas in her lap as he's slowly bleeding out and the world is burning around them. It's all dramatic. They hold the serum between them and they think about everything that could have been, you know? Because now they have a cure that actually works for real. If only things had been different. Even though things totally could have been different because they've had a temporary cure this whole time. So really anything could have happened if they had just not been kind of freaky about it. Doesn't really have the same impact when it's entirely their fault that they're in the situation. And then they kiss, because I guess now they're both on the same page, they both have the same goals, and this is their reconnecting or whatever. I don't know. Again, I don't really care for Teresa in this movie or the last one. I don't really feel like she has a lot of substance, and so it's hard to care about this romance. And then Jorge flies the Berg right up to the top of this building, spots them, and comes in to save them, which they said meet by the tunnels. I don't know where they went. I guess Gally and Mino probably went to the tunnels and that's where they found Brenda, but also why was Brenda the one that ran up with the serum if Mino is the runner who went back to get the serum? Why did Brenda come out too? I guess she just wanted to see Thomas probably. So then they probably all went back to the Berg and Thomas ran off. Like, how did they get here? They didn't have any plans to meet up here, so it had to have just been that the Berg is flying circles until they see Thomas and Teresa on top of a building. Why Thomas and Teresa would be on top of a building, I'm not sure. It's not like they had any established plan to meet here, so it just like, they happened to find them on top of this building, I guess. Teresa drags Thomas to the edge of the building, and then Vince, of course, from the right arm, safe haven, all that, he straps into the Berg and reaches out to pull them up. This is all he's good for in this entire movie. Why is he even on the rescue Berg? He doesn't need to be here. Any of the other characters could have done this. If anything, it would have been a lot more impactful if one of the other characters had done this. The only reason I can think of why you would have this character doing it is so that you can't blame any of the main characters for what happens. Because if it's Brenda, you could say that she has a preference for Thomas. If it's Mino, you could say that he didn't try hard enough and then that causes a feud between him and Thomas, or you know what I mean? So the only reason I can think that Vince would be here in this moment is so that he can be a neutral party with what happens. Because what ends up happening is Teresa drags Thomas to the edge of the building, and then as the world is crumbling, she sort of pushes Thomas, throws him up, and Vince catches him, pulls him onto the Berg. But before they can get Teresa to safety, the entire building is crumbling. She falls backwards and goes down with the flames. And I wish I could say that I cared. But you see what I mean about how if it was Mino, then maybe it would cause a feud between Thomas and him. If it's Brenda, then you could say that she just doesn't like Teresa, and now she has Thomas all for herself or something. So this is the only option that makes sense where you're not going to get mad at some other side character for not doing things how Thomas would want. And I think this is supposed to be kind of like a maybe in another life type of trope, where it's like they, despite everything that happened, came together and they reconnected in this final moment, and maybe they forgave each other and they're willing to move forward or all of that, and then it just doesn't work and now she's gone. It's like, yes, they kissed and made up, but also she totally betrayed them, and we didn't really address that at all. It's like, yes, she's always been doing what she thinks is right, but they didn't even really talk about it. Like, in the book, they extensively talk about how she realized she was in the wrong, and this whole time she's been doing what she thought would be best, but she has come to terms with the fact that maybe it's not, and now she's trying to undo all the harm that she's done, and she's trying to make sure that everybody's okay after everything that she's put them through. Like, she apologizes for what she's done, and she tries to explain that she has changed and that she's a different person now. And then in the book, when they're re-entering the maze and they're reliving all of these memories, Thomas kind of misses the thing that they had, and the friendship that they had, the connection that they had before everything went down. And sure, it's not the same after, but he can reflect on that. Again, because we don't know the state of his memories in the movie, it's a little bit harder to do something like that. So all of this just kind of falls flat. And then you get the final scene of this movie. Thomas wakes up in a shed on a beach. He walks outside to find civilization rebuilding. Everything is wonderful. The community is already well established. It's functioning. There are people with different jobs going to different locations. They seem to know what's up, which begs the question, how long has he been asleep? I'm assuming this is him waking up after the injuries and after the gunshot wound, after everything that occurred during this final battle. How long has he been asleep? And why is he waking up alone and then walking through the city like it's fine? And the only explanation that I can have, aside from him just being in a coma for a while or something, the only thing I can think of is if when Vince joins Jorge in this final scene, it's because he has already transferred his group to the safe place that they're living now. And so they've already had a little bit of extra time, and that's why they're now already functioning so well, is because they've already been living there for a while. And that would also explain why Vince was able to leave and come join this final battle, is if he already knew that the group of immune people was safe. So I have to assume that's how all of this took place, but I don't know if it was ever explicitly stated. He finds this final group of his friends, Eris, Gally, Frypan, Brenda, Jorge, and Mino, who hugs him. And then the closing scenes of this is Vince giving another pep talk to the group about how they survived and how they're reflecting on everybody that they've lost, everything that they've been through, and they celebrate their new future. While he's giving this speech, he reveals this rock wall that's going to be in the center of the community where you can carve the names of those who were lost, which is a tradition that was in the maze. I don't know if it's something that the Gladers communicated to him or if it's just something that happened to be in both settings. Because as far as I know, Vince doesn't have anything to do with the maze. Why does he know that this is their tradition? Unless it's just like a common thing that people do for when their community has lost somebody. Then don't mind me. Mino reminds Thomas that he had this item on him while he was asleep, and it's the thing that Newt had passed to him. And then we get a final message from Newt that he had written and put into this little capsule. And it's quite long, so I'm not going to read it all right now, but the general idea is he's not scared of dying, but of forgetting, of losing himself to the virus. He thinks about where they came from and repeats their names like a prayer. He wrote that he would do it all over again, and he hopes that Thomas will one day feel the same. You deserve to be happy. Thank you for being my friend. And then we end with Thomas looking out to the sea, holding a vial of the serum in his hand. And I don't really know what we're meant to feel at this point. At the end of the book, it really felt like there was no other choice but for all of these people to escape and start fresh. Ava Page, the leader of Wicked, had decided that they're not going to be able to find a cure. They haven't really made any progress throughout all of this, and rather than starting the cycle over, she's just making something new. So she made a plan to get everybody out to a new place where they can just fully start fresh, keep humanity alive, all that good stuff. They didn't find a cure, but they did find a way to keep humanity alive. That's like the big thing. It's not a perfect plan. Obviously, you know, the immune people abandoning the world and giving up on finding a cure means that there are going to be a lot of people that die, but the hope is that humanity will be able to rebuild with this new group. It's thinking of the greater good, right? They're not just devoting all of their time and energy and resources and lives into something that might not work, because if it doesn't work, then they don't have anything. At the end of the movie, they're in a very similar location to the book, but why? At this point, they discovered for sure that Thomas is able to produce a cure. They know for sure that he's able to save people. So the only reason that I can think of for why Thomas is here now, instead of helping provide a cure to a bunch of people, is because the rebels blew up the city and now Wicked doesn't exist anymore. Like, the two leaders that we've been following are both gone, so now Wicked can't function, so now they can't get the cure from Thomas. Like, is that really what we're thinking right now? Is that the doctors that are meant to be able to get a cure don't exist anymore, and so we just can't follow that path? Because that's either I have to believe that, or I have to think that Thomas is so evil that despite knowing he has a cure that could save people, he's decided that because it doesn't affect him personally, that the people in his life are no longer affected, he doesn't care. And so he goes off to live this better life with a bunch of other immune people. And I don't want to say it's evil to choose yourself, but it's like there was no harm from giving the serum, from providing this cure for people, right? He was able to do it for Brenda and nothing happened to him. So I don't understand why they abandoned the effort when it was guaranteed to work. Why is he out here? Again, obviously he wouldn't be able to save everybody, but why is the option to save nobody when they know that he could? It's so different from the book where they didn't have anything that even resembled a cure, so it didn't make sense to keep going. Even when they knew that Thomas was the final candidate, they knew that he was the best option for this cure. They said, we're gonna have to kill you, take your brain, but we still don't even know if that'll work, and if it doesn't, then we're just gonna start over and keep trying. Versus this, where nobody has to die to get the cure. They were fine even after giving some up. They were harvesting Mino for quite a while, and he was fine too, so I have to assume that all the people in the Scorch trials in that room were fine as well. So what is the reason for just running away? And that's the end. If you made it this far into the video, truly thank you so much for watching. This was such a project. It's coming out a lot later than I expected. I initially wanted to do this with the other two, but it just seemed so overwhelming. I truly did not know how to go about this, but I'm very glad that you guys asked me for it because it was really satisfying to finish, you know? If there's anything that I missed while talking about this, if there's any similarities in the movie that I skipped over, then let me know. And if there's any other book to movie comparisons that you would like to see from me, I would love to hear it. Thank you for the support on this project. I appreciate it endlessly. And I think that's all I have to say. If you like this video and you want to see others like it, you can subscribe to this channel. I have plans to post more in December, but they're very loose plans because I haven't really been posting at all. So we'll see what happens. Thank you so much. I'll see you later. Bye.